The Big Easy. Fans expect their newscasters to report the news, not to make it.
This lady's laying here, bleeding from her head all over the place.
Liz Marinello was shot in a parking lot after leaving her therapist's office. Police on the scene believed at the time that it was a robbery.
It was quite devastating to us. It really shocked the community, scared the community.
In a city that knows death and disaster, you can only be sure that today's bad news is going to be tomorrow's unbelievable headline. New Orleans is founded in 1718 by French colonists and becomes part of the United States in the Louisiana Purchase of 1803. It lies along the Mississippi River and is the most populated city in Louisiana. New Orleans' history of colonial rule brings numerous cultures and traditions into one space. Voodoo is synonymous with New Orleans, created by enslaved West Africans who merged their religious practices with local Catholicism. Nicknamed the Big Easy, New Orleans is known for a slower, simpler, and easygoing vibe. Thursday, August 31st, 2006. A sultry day in Metairie, Louisiana, a suburb right next door to the Big Easy. Mary Elizabeth Liz Marinello attends a regular counseling session.
She was visiting a therapist in Metairie, a well-traveled, well-populated area, just right outside of New Orleans, literally about 2 minutes from New Orleans.
She had sought counseling, and there was a counselor that she went to see at the Metairie Towers on Metairie Road. And on August 31st, 2006, she walked out of the building, and a scruffy man came up and fired 2 shots directly into her face.
She is shot point blank only steps from her car. Liz falls to the cement and lies in a pool of her own blood.
The scene of where Elizabeth was shot was in the parking lot of an office building. The gunshots alerted several people who came over. The police were called immediately. Everybody was there quite quickly.
In Parish, number 1, operator 58, may I help? Ma'am, I'm on Metairie Road behind Metairie Towers in the parking lot. This lady's laying here, bleeding from her head all over the place. It looks like she's been shot on the side of her head. Okay, we'll get someone over there, okay? Oh, Jesus.
Liz is alive. As they await the paramedics, police talk to terrified witnesses to identify the shooter.
The perpetrator was sort of a scraggly man who rode away on a bicycle. He had been panhandling in the neighborhood.
People report seeing a tall, thin man in a long-sleeved shirt, wearing a beard and mustache, who has the appearance of a vagrant.
This is a time in New Orleans when crime is way up, and to police, this looks like just another robbery gone wrong. But there's just one problem with that story.
There was nothing missing. There was nothing missing from her purse, nothing missing from her truck.
Investigators at the scene find 2 cartridge cases that belong to a .38 caliber firearm.
This could be a failed robbery attempt, or worse, an unmotivated attack of extreme violence. The ID in her wallet tells police her name, and that last name, Marinello, has a familiar ring to it. Mary Elizabeth Marinello, known as Liz, is a 45-year-old mother of a 10-year-old daughter and is recently divorced.
She was from Mississippi. She moved here. She met her first husband. She got divorced from him.
A healthcare professional, Liz is a vibrant woman who loves movies and attends plays.
She worked at Children's Hospital as a respiratory therapist, and all her patients had nothing but fantastic things to say about her.
Liz recently is in the public spotlight. 2 years earlier, she meets famous New Orleans sportscaster Vince Marinello.
They had started dating in 2004, where they met at a charity event at a local bar and music venue, the Rock and Bowl.
The bowling alley and dance hall is a popular spot in New Orleans for Zydeco music.
One night in January 2004, they were having some Elvis impersonators. And when Vince Marinello saw Liz from across the room, he was smitten. And he asked her to dance, and after that, I think it was the next day or 2 days later, he sent her flowers. Their courtship was kind of awkward because he was 66 years old and she was 41, and she recognized that age difference. When he sent her flowers on Valentine's Day of 2004 and asked her on a date, she decided she would go.
Even though Vince is over 20 years her senior and known for his toupee, he has a flamboyant style and an undeniable confidence. He dazzles her by telling her about his fortune, law degree, and even hints at fascinating connections, including television personalities, police, and even the mafia. A whirlwind courtship results in marriage only 6 months later, on October 23rd, 2004.
So Vince was a well-known, well-respected, and well-liked newscaster here in the New Orleans area. He had an emphasis on sports, was very knowledgeable, and really knew everyone in town, especially connected to the sports community.
And he gains even more public respect when disaster hits. August 29, 2005. Hurricane Katrina hits New Orleans. The hurricane's 19-foot storm surge breaches the city's levees. When New Orleans floods, Vince Marinello stays on the air, giving life-saving updates and reassuring residents as they call in, and giving words of comfort to the dislocated.
He actually got on the air and was broadcasting to people, kind of saved some people's lives while he did that.
He was one of the people that stayed behind and reported on the aftermath of Katrina and just the horrible effects on everything. And I think that took a toll on him, as it did everyone who remained in New Orleans at that time.
This May-December romance is a second chance for both Vince and Liz, and they're a dream couple, beloved by friends and admirers. And now that dream is crushed. Liz struggles for her life while a shooter is on the loose.
You know, overall, the community, I think, was initially shocked by this incident. Just a shooting that took place along a very nice stretch of suburban Metairie, sort of a well-to-do neighborhood where there's not a lot of crime.
It's hours later when police track down the victim's husband.
This was actually in Jackson, Mississippi, which is a couple of hours outside of New Orleans. He was with some friends watching the Saints game.
Police inform Vince Marinello that his wife is in hospital, fighting for her life. And then, investigators have a breakthrough.
The office building where Elizabeth was shot had surveillance cameras, where they captured the person they believe was the perpetrator on the surveillance cameras, pacing around and doing like a lot of people, folding his arms.
The surveillance video shows a man fitting the description of a vagrant lurking in the parking lot 30 minutes before Liz arrives. Immediately before she leaves the building, though, the perpetrator moves to an area where Liz was shot.
Video and witness descriptions point police to a prime suspect, a man that has been spotted in the area that fits the description.
But there was one individual who lived in a neighborhood near where Elizabeth was shot. He'd been panhandling in the building in which Elizabeth had visited, and he had gone to the church directly across the street and spoken to the church secretary about getting some handouts. We looked into the gentleman's background. He was a heroin addict who is currently at large.
Police must find this man fast. He is armed and could kill again.
Witnesses describe seeing a man putting a bicycle into the trunk of a white Ford Taurus.
Investigators search the vehicle and find a box of 9mm cartridges in the glove compartment.
If there's a reason to kill somebody, hurting your child might be one.
Liz Marinello is known as half of a New Orleans celebrity couple, the recent wife of a famous and beloved sports newscaster. She's shot twice in the face by a disheveled gunman as she leaves a therapy session, and the suspect escapes on a bicycle. As Liz fights for her life, police match the description to a well-known area panhandler and go on the hunt for the suspected shooter. The man is wanted by police.
He had several open attachments for missing cord. Of importance is the fact that the perpetrator who shot Elizabeth rode away on a bicycle. This gentleman had several bicycles in his backyard.
Police converge on the suspect and arrest him. On Friday, September 1st, 2006, in the early hours after her attack, Mary Elizabeth Marinello succumbs to her injuries.
She passed away at the hospital around 2 o'clock in the morning.
The case is now one of cold-blooded murder. The suspect, who has been apprehended by police, is interrogated. Not only does he match the description of the perpetrator, he owns several bicycles, which are seized by police for forensic testing.
The police anxiously await the results, but after a thorough forensic examination learn that there is nothing to link the vagrant and his bicycles to the murder of Liz Marinello.
In the meantime, the widower Vince Marinello makes an appearance at police headquarters with his lawyer to make a statement about his whereabouts at the time of the murder.
For the record, could you state your full name, please?
Vincent J. Marinello.
And you agreed prior to this interview to come down and participate in an interview regarding the shooting death of your wife, Elizabeth Marinello. Is that correct?
Ex-wife.
Ex-wife. Okay. Aside from the terminology ex-wife, you were explaining
Yes,
that.
that's correct.
Interestingly, police learn it is very recently that Liz and Vince have become estranged.
Vince, when were you notified of Elizabeth's death?
Last night, August the 31st, about 10:15, 10:20.
At the time, were you aware that she was dead or just shot?
I was not aware at all.
After you received that information, what did you do?
I think I was in shock. I don't know what I did. I guess if you want to describe me, I was in stunned disbelief.
Liz is no stranger to marital problems.
Elizabeth had been married before Vince, and she was in the middle of a very contentious custody battle with a minor child. He had accused Elizabeth of abusing the child, which is, if there's a reason to kill somebody, hurting your child might be one.
And there are more hints of abuse by Liz.
There was an incident where Marinello claimed that Liz attacked him and scratched him. There was a police report in the Harahan Police Department of abuse.
Police learn that because of alleged abuse by Liz against her daughter, her ex-husband files a petition to reopen custody matters. But Liz and her lawyers are no-shows.
Police turn their line of questioning back to Vince.
Do you have any idea who shot Elizabeth?
No, I don't.
Did you shoot Elizabeth?
No, I didn't.
Do you own a firearm?
Yes, I do. A 9mm Smith & Wesson. I bought it at Elliott's gun shop.
A 9mm would not match the .38 caliber shell casings found at the scene of the murder. Police want to hear from Liz's ex-husband. He claims that their divorce is amicable and believes the incidents of abuse Vince refers to are more inappropriate moments than dangerous behavior on Liz's part. Police want to know if Liz's ex-husband owns a gun. He states that he does not. Now that the vagrant has been discounted, investigators again review all possible clues.
Witnesses describe seeing a man putting a bicycle into the trunk of a white Ford Taurus, but police are unsure whether this incident is related to the shooting.
Investigators check on Vince's alibi for the time of the murder, and it turns out Vince has a standing date to watch sports with a friend.
He watched every game that was on TV. If he wasn't there in person, he was certainly watching on TV. He had some close friends in Mississippi. He went to stay with them. He was living in a trailer. He didn't really have a TV at home.
The time it would take Vince to drive to his friend's home would make him a very unlikely suspect. However, something isn't adding up.
Forensically, the sheriff's office was able to determine that Ms. Marinello was killed by a .38 caliber bullet, which is one of the most common guns that are used. There are a dime a dozen, especially here in the South and especially in Louisiana.
Detectives investigating the case went to the gun shop and retrieved a receipt for that 9mm handgun. An employee at the gun store revealed to investigators that Vince had come in with a .38 caliber 5-shot revolver.
He remembers the encounter clearly because he recognizes Vince as his favorite sports broadcaster from television.
The employee tells detectives that he had inspected and test-fired that revolver that Vince had brought in.
The clerk shoots 5 rounds into a test tube, examines the cartridges, and informs Vince one of them has a dog bone fracture, or a stress fracture. The clerk scrubs and oils the gun for Vince.
Vince had been to a gun store at some point in 2004, which is not a crime. We're here in Louisiana. Louisiana is an open carry state. The right to own guns and possess guns are ingrained in our state constitution.
But there is more to the exchange. Officers are surprised when the clerk hurries out to the parking lot to have a private word with them.
The employee asked the detectives, "Are you looking for some information on 158 grain nyclad ammunition?" Police want to know why a gun shop clerk correctly guesses the type of ammunition that killed Liz Marinello.
Liz Marinello is shot point blank in the face by what appears to be a vagrant. Hours later, she succumbs to her injuries. Her recent marriage to famous New Orleans sportscaster Vince Marinello is going through a vicious annulment. When the prime suspect turns out to be a false lead, police dig deeper and get a big surprise from a staff member at a gun shop where Vince Marinello recently shops.
The employee revealed to investigators that Vince had purchased a box of 50 nylon-coated bullets. Vince had said he had wanted the best stuff available. These nylon-coated bullets, also known as KTW, were produced from 1960 to 1990. The bullet itself was either brass or steel. The coating on top of it was to protect the gun that it was being fired through from having the barrel eroded by the hard metal of the brass or the steel. It's not actually the nylon coating that allowed it to penetrate better, but it was actually the material that was used for the bullet portion. Because these bullets were very unique and they were found in the autopsy, then it gave investigators all the more reason to go and look further into where these bullets were purchased. Detectives, during their investigation, come to the realization that Elliott's gun store is the only store that sells that nylon-coated ammunition. If an individual has those nylon-coated bullets, and then there's nylon-coated fired bullets in an individual, well, naturally you would go ahead and be able to piece it together that it is possible that whoever purchased those nylon-coated bullets fired them into the victim.
The gun shop visit focuses authorities on a new prime suspect.
Hey, maybe we ought to start looking at the husband, because when you look sometimes at victimology, it's always somebody closest to the victim that commits the crime.
Elizabeth was visiting her therapist. One of the issues she was talking to the therapist about was her marital problems with Vince. They were not married for a long time, but they were having some difficulties. And I think that immediately makes detectives focus on a spouse.
And police find there is more to this famous sportscaster than the persona seen in the public eye.
Vince Marinello was raised in the Ninth Ward, which has a specific dialect that they use. It's more like Brooklynese.
Marinello is Italian. At one point, the Italian community was quite prominent in the French Quarter.
And because he spoke with this type of dialect, it endeared him to the New Orleans people. He started every one of his programs with, "Hello, everybody." He was a pretty good sportscaster in his day. He was a character. He was a character.
He's famous for many years, but as he ages, he's moved to radio to make way for young up-and-comers in television. This is a demotion for Vince. But in August 2005, New Orleans is ravaged by Hurricane Katrina, which floods more than 80% of the city.
Post-Katrina, he was still working at WWL Radio. I think it was the only radio station that was still open at the time. And they were handing out news. They were telling people where they could get food, how to apply for FEMA relief, generally what was going on in particular areas. And he did a great job doing that.
Vince never leaves his post during the disaster.
He was also an announcer at the fairgrounds for horse racing. He was familiar with New Orleans sports, more than I think a lot of other announcers would be.
When Vince meets the much younger Liz, he is relentless in his pursuit of her.
When they first met and they started to fall in love, he told Liz, "Look, I got $3 million in bonds and they're getting ready to mature, and you know what? You don't have to work the rest of your life."
Liz is swept away.
They were married in October of 2004, but all the attention had to be on Marinello. He had a makeup artist that was at the wedding that was putting makeup on him. Every time it would crack or it would leak or something, he would have the makeup artist come up and put the makeup on him. He adored the woman, but it was more of an obsession than anything else.
The too hasty wedding sours rapidly.
Later on, there were notes found where he wrote notes to Liz which were very abusive, like, you know, "You didn't compliment me on my shirt, you didn't compliment me on how I look today," and things of that nature. Liz realized that she was living a lie with this man.
But things become irreparable when Liz discovers that when she and Vince get married, Vince is still married to his first wife, Andrea.
She discovered that he had not moved all of his stuff to her house, and he was still living with his wife, Andrea, who had filed a lawsuit against him because he got money fraudulently using her name somehow. That was the straw that broke the camel's back.
In Louisiana, there's a procedure in which most divorces take place, in which the plaintiff obtains two judgments. A preliminary default judgment, which was obtained prior to Vince's marriage to Liz, but subsequent to that preliminary default judgment, a confirmation of that judgment has to take place, which makes the preliminary default judgment final. That had not taken place.
She filed for divorce with all the other lies that had been piled on top. She took a trip to New York, and she didn't tell him why she was going. She was actually going to meet Marinello's brother, Peter. And Peter told her, "Look, he doesn't have $3 million. The only money he gets is Social Security and the money from the radio station."
Even though Vince was successful, he was not successful at keeping his money.
Marinello also had a penchant for telling tall tales. He said he had links with the mafia. He had a law degree. He never went to college, so he never had a law degree, but he told people that's what he did. She was wondering, had he ever told her the truth?
As police investigate Vince Marinello more deeply, something about his gestures strike a chord of recognition.
The office building where Elizabeth was shot had surveillance cameras where they captured a person they believe was a perpetrator on the surveillance cameras. The person is unrecognizable. Nobody could look at that tape and say that's Vince Marinello. Or could they say it's anyone else in particular? It just looked like a homeless fellow pacing around and doing like a lot of people, folding his arms.
But it is just these movements that make police look twice.
The district attorney's office had obtained some other surveillance footage of Vince Marinello.
While he was waiting to make his statement, a video camera happened to catch him walking in his mannerisms.
He was walking around with his arms folded.
It was the mannerisms that he exhibited that kind of caught the police's attention, and they made the connection that he may have been in a disguise and he may have committed the murder at that time.
Police wonder if Vince Marinello is actually the vagrant who shot and killed Liz. Police discover Vince has had a FEMA trailer, commonly given by the United States government as temporary housing, assigned to victims of natural disasters. Vince Marinello has had his FEMA unit since Hurricane Katrina hit.
They got a search warrant for his FEMA trailer.
When investigators arrive at the FEMA trailer, a clue from the initial crime scene comes into focus.
A witness had told investigators seeing a white Ford Taurus, a similar car, at the scene of the crime in which an individual was trying to put in a bite.
And Marinello's car reveals gunshot residue.
There's two types of gunshot residue when we're dealing with firearms. The first type is expelled through the front of the gun, through the muzzle of the gun. It's known as muzzle-to-target gunshot residue. The primer area is initially struck by the firing pin. When that primer is struck, it sends a spark into the powder to detonate the cartridge to fire the bullet down the gun. Well, that primer has certain materials in it that are shock sensitive, that are expelled on the rear portion of the gun. They're expelled not only onto the person's hand, but an environment in close proximity to where the individual was fired the gun. When they test for primer gunshot residue, there are three possible conclusions that you can come to if an area or a person is positive for gunshot residue. They are: the person fired a gun, the person was in close proximity to another individual who fired a gun, or the person was in an environment where barium and antimony and lead were present. It's very easy to cross-contaminate an area. If you had gone out shooting and you touched something, it's very easy to transfer it.
And his explanation was, well, I had fired the 9mm. Because when he went to the gun store to buy the bullets, I think he fired it a couple of times. That's the explanation that he gave, that he had fired the weapon before. And it got on his fingers or something, and he got it all over the car.
Investigators search the vehicle and find a box of 9mm cartridges in the glove compartment. They come to the realization that those cartridges are inconsistent with those used to kill Liz Marinello.
Officers enter with a warrant.
When they went to the FEMA trailer, they found the list, and the list was very interesting.
Vince, being in the media, took down a list and made notes for everything.
And this list, sitting out in plain sight, is much more interesting than police could ever have imagined. There is plenty of mutual acrimony and an impending divorce between Vince and Liz Marinello when she is shot to death by what appears to be a vagrant. A gun shop sales clerk informs detectives that he sells Vince Marinello the kind of bullets Liz is shot to death with.
And when police compare footage of the vagrant with footage of Vince, they have cause to wonder whether Vince killed his wife in disguise.
They obtain a warrant and conduct a search of his trailer.
When they went to the FEMA trailer, they found the list.
Vince Marinello writes 2 pages of what investigators refer to as a to-do list for himself.
Vince was a meticulous note-taker, being in the media for so long.
The list includes what to wear: mustache, black tennis shoes, gloves, and how to dispose of evidence. Bike, paint, clothes, burn, gun, river on the way to mama.
On the second page, there is a map of the parking lot where Liz Marinello is shot.
Vince Marinello had written down on the list, contact Harry Lee, who was the sheriff. Now, why would you want to contact Harry Lee? And it was very planned out, very methodical.
Detectives believe this to-do list is as good as a confession.
And then when they started investigating Marinello, they found out that he went to a costume shop, and he wanted to buy a mustache. And they asked him, do you want a beard? No, I already have one.
Police believe this is enough evidence to arrest Vince Marinello for murder.
They thought it was a homeless man, but then they put 2 and 2 together when they thought, they found out all these places that he went. Finally, they believed they had a really strong, viable suspect in Vince Marinello.
On September 7, 2006, 69-year-old Vince Marinello surrenders to authorities and is booked into the Jefferson Parish Jail in Gretna on second-degree murder charges. News of this very public figure's arrest makes a huge media splash. Astonished friends and fans reel as the details of the case become known.
And people were stunned because they thought, hey, this was just a guy that people kind of laughed at a little bit, just doing the sports. And then all of a sudden, wow, he's being arrested for murder. He was in jail on a suicide watch for a while because they had a bail hearing coming up. So he was trying to figure out who he was going to call to get the bail money.
But his friends are unwilling to put up their homes to make bail for Vince Marinello.
And Marinello was mad about that. He's very bitter about that. He said, if my friend had committed it, I don't care who he was, if he was the Pope, I would have put up my house and things. But I think at that point, a lot of people were just not convinced that he was innocent.
As the case goes to trial, Marinello's attorneys request a change of venue due to the publicity surrounding the case.
There was no way Vince Marinello was going to get a fair trial in Jefferson Parish.
The request is granted.
So the incident took place in Jefferson Parish. However, the trial actually took place in Lafayette, Louisiana. Lafayette is in the heart of Cajun country. Vince had some attorneys who were helping him free of charge before then. But once Vince was indicted, the case was too big to handle for free. He had no money at the time. He simply had no money, like a lot of people find themselves at some stage in their lives. And he qualified for our services. The court appointed the public defender's office, and we took the case. This was one of the most media-intensive cases I've ever handled. The media was present at every court hearing, every status hearing. If we were walking to the courthouse to pick up an extra police report, there were 3 reporters out there. Media scrutiny was all over this case. It was on the news every night.
Defense say the crime can't be proved because the CCTV footage doesn't depict Vince's face. The prosecution vows that by the end of the trial, quote, there will be no doubt in your mind that he is the one who committed this crime. But it's anyone's guess how the trial will go.
They connected him to the weapon, but they couldn't find the weapon. But they found a lot of circumstantial things there that really brought the case full circle.
Without having the firearm to definitively say that those bullets came from that gun, and then to tie that firearm back to the individual, the suspect, is very difficult.
With circumstantial evidence, with no murder weapon, can the prosecution make the case against Vince Marinello stick? Vince Marinello goes to trial for the brutal shooting murder of his wife, Liz Marinello. There are similarities between Vince's physicality and that of the footage of the killer vagrant, and what appears to be a murder, quote, to-do list found in Vince's trailer. But defense argues that all of the prosecution's evidence is purely circumstantial, and Vince is an innocent man.
They didn't have the weapon, so they couldn't really match him to the weapon. Like I said, there was a lot of circumstantial evidence that put him at the scene of the crime.
Defense argues that it cannot be determined when the so-called checklist is written. There are alternate ways to interpret it that may not necessarily refer to murder.
He knew he was a suspect as a spouse of the person that was killed, and he had plans to go meet with the sheriff, and he created a list for things that he wanted to talk to the sheriff about. Some of the things on the list to talk to Sheriff Lee about coincided with the murder of Liz Marinello. Some had nothing to do with the case whatsoever. And the prosecutors pointed to the jury at the things that related to the murder of Elizabeth. We pointed to the things that had nothing to do with the murder whatsoever.
Vince's lawyer questions whether Vince actually purchases a disguise to dress as the vagrant, since Vince wore hairpieces regularly and was known to frequent hair shops. It is a strong defense, but the tide begins to turn against Vince Marinello.
The district attorney played the 2 surveillance tapes side by side to try to show that was the same person.
A former handyman of Marinello's takes the stand, who has a conversation with Vince one day at the Marinello's home before the murder.
Marinello asks, "Can I put a silencer on a .38? And he thought that kind of strange when he asked him that.
The handyman testifies that Vince shows him a revolver, which matches the murder weapon.
The white car found at the FEMA trailer is a ringer for the one spotted near the crime scene.
He was seen putting the bicycle in his trunk by a teacher at a school that was down the street.
Testimony from the counselor reports that Vince knows of his estranged wife's standing appointment at the office building between 3 and 3:50 p.m. on Thursdays. Knowing the time Liz is to exit the building can explain why the perpetrator locates to the area near to where Liz is shot with perfect timing.
Vince was very well respected and well liked, and he really was. Vince had a lot of friends, knew everybody all over town.
But his comrades start to jump ship. Vince's alibi is blown when his friends of over 25 years admit that Vince, in fact, arrives later to their home than they initially report on the evening of the murder.
The alibi was falling apart.
When Vince is informed of Liz's shooting, he admits that he makes no attempts to contact the hospital or check on Liz Marinello's daughter, his stepchild. But Vince's cell phone records become key.
It was quite devastating to us, to be honest. This was the first case in Jefferson Parish in which cell phone records were used in a criminal case. They are routinely used in every serious case now, but this was the first one back in 2008. They were able to ping off of towers, and the prosecution tried to show that through Vince's cell phone records that his timeline in his statement to the police did not add up to where the cell phone records suggested he probably was at that time.
What I think really clinched it for the jury, and what prosecuting attorneys always hope for, is that the defendant will testify.
Vince takes the stand.
And when he got up there, it was very arrogant. It was very nonchalant, not a lot of emotion. I think he wanted the attention, no matter if it was negative or positive here. He was bragging about his hotel room, how he had a microwave, he had access to a jacuzzi. You're on trial for your life here, and you're bragging about this. You know, I'm not going to say it was public opinion. I think the evidence strongly pointed to him being the murderer.
It turns out the physical fight between Liz and Vince that he reports to police actually happens because Vince has pinned Liz's daughter to the wall, and Liz has to fight him to get him off.
Assistant district attorneys later described Marinello as a narcissistic, egotistical, self-centered person. The jury did not deliberate for long before they came back with a verdict.
On December 13th, 2008, after a 2-week trial, the jury makes their judgment.
Vince was ultimately convicted as charged, convicted of second-degree murder, which in Louisiana is a mandatory life sentence. Vince was sentenced to life without parole.
The jury needs only 90 minutes of deliberation.
Back then, a typical jury in Louisiana would take about 2 hours to reach a verdict.
But some believe the sentence does not reflect the crime.
He knew exactly what he wanted to do. He had a map, bought the bullets, bought the disguise. And to me, that was premeditated, but he got second-degree murder. People got to see who he really was. The family really chastised him at the sentencing hearing. He didn't show any remorse whatsoever, at all.
I would say the cell phone records were the most detrimental to him. I do not think they pinpointed to his guilt, but they certainly did undermine his credibility with the jury.
And in this particular case, the evidence being those nylon-coated bullets not only were sold by a specific gun store, but they were in the victim, lend to the fact that the case is unique in that. And it aided in the investigation, I'm sure, for the detectives.
I think he thought that his connections with the police department were going to get him out of this trouble. I believe his motive, and a few other people that I've spoken to, including some of Liz's friends, were that when Liz discovered that he was a bigamist, he didn't want his reputation ruined. And he figured if he got rid of her and they could not find out who did it, then his reputation would stay intact. all this information that Liz had probably would have denigrated his career.
The prosecutors really tried to stress that Vince was concerned that Liz was going to paint him as a bigamist. Vince believed he was divorced at the time he married Liz.
I don't want to see Liz forgotten either, such a sweet person, and to have her life taken away from her like that because Vince Marinello wanted her as a possession. She was a very angelic individual. I think it was his relentless pursuit of her that finally it was by attrition that she went out with him and eventually married him. I think this is one of the very few cases in New Orleans criminal history that the truth was it came out. There was no spin to it or anything like that.
Vince Marinello subsequently appeals his conviction, and it is upheld by the Louisiana Third Circuit Court of Appeals. But the Louisiana Supreme Court declines to hear his appeal. Phoenix, Arizona, 2005. The busy western city is getting ready for another summer of fun.
It was too damn hot. And then we had two little stories that made it a whole lot hotter.
It starts out horrific and just keeps getting worse.
These were bizarre incidents. People were terrified.
Bodies are hitting the ground again and again. Every day is a nightmare. Nobody knows who's safe.
I think everybody, including the cops, were a little blown away.
They shoot dogs, they shoot horses. Any living, breathing creature is fair game. And now they think there's more than one. That's just a start.
Phoenix, the capital and most populous city in the state of Arizona. The city is nestled in the northeastern reaches of the Sonoran Desert, but that hasn't deterred anyone from flocking here.
They call it the Valley of the Sun, and it encompasses about a half dozen cities, and you wouldn't know if you were in one or the other one unless you lived there. They all sprawl together.
In 2005, the locals find themselves fearing for their lives.
I think there was some period of time where we sort of this growing apprehension that this is going exactly where we all think it's going. And it's really bad.
In the nearby suburb of Tolleson, home to almost 5,000 residents, a dark presence is lurking. A presence ready and willing to take an innocent life. At first, it's random dog shootings. Then, they shoot a horse. Police don't know what to make of the animals being shot at for no reason.
So this little tiny town adjacent to Phoenix has a lot of horse properties and is basically kind of a rodeo town. And someone started shooting the horses that lived in people's front yards and in their backyards.
A horse is gunned down by a .22 caliber rifle. Police must uncover if this is a random attack or part of a bigger scheme if they hope to find the shooter.
These random shootings are taking place, and it's even more unnerving to know that they were animals. Why would somebody do this?
And don't forget, there was also different jurisdictions, so it's hard to see the big picture if you only have one or two cases.
Just these random dogs and horses that were just outside. They were easy targets.
But as the moon appears in the night sky, a dark and unnerving night is only beginning. Later that same night, things escalate.
David Estrada was a beloved young man. He had a mother who doted on him and several sisters who treated him like the pet of the family. He was musical and he was bright and he was movie star handsome. He was struggling to find his way as he approached adulthood. He left home and was living on the streets with his guitar and had a goal to make it to California, San Francisco. David was not an untethered person. He had people who wanted to take care of him. But David was following the beat of his own path and happened to be on a sidewalk that night, sleeping under the stars, something he liked to do.
Estrada has set up camp outside a bus stop nearby, and he sees a car slowly creeping up.
And someone drove up alongside him and shot him.
It's just an act of sheer cowardice on the shooter's part. Estrada was gunned down in cold blood. If it's indeed the same shooter, they've stepped up their game. You know, shooting a random horse is one thing, but killing a person randomly at a bus stop is on a whole nother level. It's almost as if the shooter was trying to get up the nerve to kill a person by shooting the horse first.
Detective Ron Rock from the Tolleson Police Department came to the murder scene of David Estrada that night, and there was change on the sidewalk next to him, money. There was a nice quality guitar nearby. So he looked at this and said, this isn't a robbery. This is not someone who came up to him and said, give me all your money or take all your valuables. So Ron Rock, to his credit, knew there was something distinct about this murder.
Well, it appears as though they drove up and offered him some change and then shot him in the face. But there's no indication or no clue as to why they did this.
Officers make a critical discovery. Bullet slugs from inside the victim. The slugs are sent to the police crime lab for further analysis.
And it was, devastating to come outside in the morning and find your horse bleeding or lying on the ground dead. But these seemed isolated because it didn't have anything to do with Phoenix. It seemed like a small town case. There was a Burger King that got shot out, a murder on a sidewalk somewhere that seemed puzzling, but no one was connecting the dots.
Police discovered that the .22 caliber bullet casings that were found at the scenes where the horses and dogs were shot came from the same gun responsible for the killing of David Estrada. A profile is beginning to emerge, but will it hold up?
Exotic dancer Georgia Thompson is walking through her apartment parking lot after a late-night shift. She hears someone behind and yells at them to leave her alone, but is shot dead at point-blank range with the .38 caliber handgun. Police are perplexed. Are these crimes connected? When they look at what's happening in the city, they realize that just a few weeks earlier, a sexual assault occurs in the same area.
They were walking home, forced these two young women behind some bushes, made them undress. One of the young women was visibly pregnant.
Then, a week later, there is another sexual assault, but this one combined with a robbery. Police question locals to see if anyone has seen or heard anything. But aside from Georgia's screams moments before her death, they have nothing to go on. They plead with citizens to provide any information that can lead to an arrest.
No one could have imagined that this is just the beginning.
3 men were found shot, 2 dead in downtown Phoenix.
In the wake of so many killings, the community was just on razor's edge.
If the citizens of Phoenix were scared before, they're absolutely terrified now.
Disturbing crimes are happening around Phoenix, Arizona. Women have been sexually assaulted and 1 murdered, and several people have been shot, randomly targeted at night, along with several dogs and horses. Using ballistic evidence, police have discovered that the same gun is used in both the David Estrada murder and the animal killings. It appears they have a serial shooter on their hands. Over the next few weeks, more incidents occur. Sexual assaults and robberies are becoming commonplace. Shortly before 10 p.m., a dog named Shep is killed. And another named Irving is shot and wounded by a .22 caliber rifle within a few blocks of each other, just north of Camelback Road in Glendale.
One of the major differences between being able to compare a .22 caliber bullet casing from that of a shotgun, for example, a 410, is that a .22 caliber casing can be matched to the firearm that actually shot it. This is very difficult, almost impossible to do with a shotgun shell.
As the canine body count rises, so too does the human count.
Nathaniel Schaffner went to a convenience store one night. He walked over, and as he walked away from the convenience store, got a few blocks away, he came upon a scene where there was a car pulled over in a dark street, and there was a gun coming out of the window, and the barrel of this gun was pointing at a stray dog that was innocently capering about the scene, trying to find something to eat. Nathaniel came up to the car and, in an angry way, said a lot of things to stop them from shooting the dog. Don't shoot that dog. So what happened? The men in the car shot Nathaniel instead. Sometime later, an off-duty police officer was coming home from a social occasion with his wife late at night, and as he turns down the street, his headlights light up a man laying in the street with liquid all around him. He thinks what anyone would think, this is a man who's passed out, and that's beer. And he didn't have all his equipment with him, didn't have his uniform. He didn't feel like he was the right person to handle it, but he did call it in. Paramedics arrived, and they leaned over Nathaniel Schaffner, and they said, "Oh, this isn't beer, this is blood." So Nathaniel Schaffner died protecting a stray dog.
At 6 p.m., 39-year-old Tina Washington is attacked and killed.
Even by a veteran cop's standards, it was a terrible scene.
A witness who manages to hide behind a steel door.
But the man, in his terror, was unable to give them a good description. That crime scene was very valuable to police because they found a shell casing. But the savvy detectives there at the scene noticed that she seemed to have no jewelry. Turns out that Tina Washington had what was called a mother's ring. That was gone. One of the sons told police that was missing.
Police wondered if these killings might be connected, changing weapons for different scenarios. For example, using a handgun when he's on foot, or when he's in his car using a rifle or a shotgun. But this all changes on December 29th, 2005.
At 7 p.m., the shooting starts. First, it's a bartending school, but no one is hurt. Then, at 10:10 p.m., a dog is killed while being walked by its owner in a park. 20 minutes later, Jose Ortiz is killed on North 10th Avenue in Phoenix, and Marco Carrillo is shot and killed 1 block away. At 11:39 p.m., Timothy Torde is shot in the neck and wounded nearby. Shortly after midnight, 2 dogs are shot and killed on East Granada. A German Shepherd is also killed on North 32nd Street. At 2:15 a.m., an off-duty Marine is shot and wounded.
I think you could say the official start of the serial shooter case was December 29th, 2005. This is when 3 men were found shot, 2 dead in downtown Phoenix. And the detective working that case the next morning got a call from a detective from a tiny little police department in a tiny little town adjacent to Phoenix who said, "You know, I have an unsolved case from earlier in the year. This sounds an awful lot like your case last night."
Overwhelmed with bodies and ballistics, detectives soon make a startling discovery. All of the victims of the drive-by rifle shootings are males and animals, and all of their handgun victims are female.
This changes everything. It's definitely a breakthrough in their investigation.
Could there be 2 active serial killers on the loose, both operating at the same time?
We were hearing police say serial killer, not serial killer. Oh, it's a rapist, it's this, it's that. We didn't know what was going on. If you were just a regular person not privy to everything that was happening inside the police department, you didn't know what was going on. All you knew is that you were frightened.
If the citizens of Phoenix were scared before, they're absolutely terrified now. Anything and anyone could be next.
Starting in early summer of 2005, a reign of terror has been waged over the residents of metropolitan Phoenix, Arizona. On the fateful night of December 29th, 2005, a rampage leaves 2 men dead, along with several other dogs and a wounded ex-Marine. All shot with either a .22 caliber rifle or a .410 shotgun from a passing vehicle. While these instances occur in a similar pattern, at the same time, a serial predator is haunting the areas around Baseline Road. These crimes are done on foot, using a handgun. With already 7 instances, including robbery, rape, and murder, the profiles of the separate instances indicate their worst fears. 2 separate serial killers are at work in Arizona.
Now the police are dealing with what are believed to be 2 active serial killers. They need to work around the clock to try to catch them. They decided to break the unit into 2 groups. One dedicated to catching who they called the serial shooter. The other group was dedicated to catching who they called the Baseline Rapist. The Baseline Rapist came to be known as the Baseline Killer because the victims were killed in the area of Baseline Road.
Authorities discover evidence that could further the Baseline Killer case.
It's a gunshot fired off by the rapist to scare away onlookers that conclusively ties the assaults and robberies to the murders. Police are able to match the casings to the .38.
The rapist murderer was doing everything in his power to prevent any DNA evidence from showing up at his crime scenes, from attempting to use condoms, to making the victims rub their saliva with dirt and then rubbing it over their own bodies to basically pollute any DNA that he may have left on them.
But for as carefully as he tries to cover his tracks, the Baseline Killer soon slips up. Detectives are able to recover DNA evidence from one of the previous sexual assaults. Now they have a lead. But as much as detectives learn over the course of their investigation, in 2006, his pace of assaults picks up. 18 separate attacks take place, which are all attributed to the Baseline Killer. That number rises to 23 over the next several months.
February 2006 proved to be a very bloody and terrible time. 2 women, hardworking women working in a food truck, Romelia Vargas and Myrna Palma Roman. These 2 women were found brutally murdered early one morning inside their food truck. And then March comes along, and another one of those headline-grabbing, gut-punching stories. You had 2 young workers at a Yoshi's restaurant, George Chow and Lilian Sanchez. They were closing down. These 2 young people murdered by what was now identified, and police were looking for the serial rapist and murderer. And shortly after that, a woman named Sofia Nunez was found dead in her bathtub, found by her young son, who was worried about his mom when she didn't come to school to pick him up.
The community is at wit's end, dealing with seemingly weekly events of new deaths and assaults. Authorities make pleas to the public to come forward if they know anyone or anything that could lead them to the killers.
The officers in the community feel helpless because the people that they're sworn to protect are being targeted. All they can do at this point is hope that they collect enough evidence fast enough to bring the case to a conclusion.
Meanwhile, the so-called serial shooter hasn't struck since that fateful December 29th, 2005 night. And police still haven't been able to get a description of the shooter's car. It could be anyone. The summer of fear starts when Claudia Gutierrez Cruz is shot and killed on May 2nd with a shotgun.
She'd gone in for an extra shift as a glass stacker at a restaurant in Scottsdale because she thought they might need extra help because there had been sort of a strike that night. And they said, you know what, I think we got it covered, you can go. And she came home on the bus, but the connecting bus, it was too late. So she had to walk where the further bus left her off, all the way to her apartment. And she died.
That same night, 17-year-old Kabili Tambadu is shot and wounded.
He had been sent to the store that night to pick up some milk at the convenience store, so that's why he was on the sidewalk that night. And he was shot in the back, and the 17-year-old boy who's made it all the way to America from a very troubled, traumatic background from a war-torn country in Africa, Sierra Leone, staggers from the sidewalk through the bushes into the marble floors of a hotel and drips blood with him across their marble floors and asks for help.
Over the next 2 months, the carnage holds the city hostage. During this shooting spree, 2 Walmarts are set ablaze. Adding to the general carnage that Phoenix residents are dealing with, little do police know that these fires will be key later.
It was really scary living in the Phoenix area at that time because you had 2 serial killers working at the same time. I personally am unaware of that happening, at least not commonly anywhere before. Employers were putting up flyers, do not go to your car alone. People stopped jogging, all of this, because it was just too frightening. And, with good reason. People were dying and being maimed and traumatized. It was horrifying.
Detectives set up a tip line in the hopes of gaining vital information that will help them capture the serial shooter. And they get no shortage of calls, straining their resources as they try to make sense of all the leads. And just when people start thinking it can't get any worse, it does. The baseline killer strikes again, but this time for all to see.
Then along comes June 29th, the summer of 2006. A young woman named Carmen Miranda is washing her car. Not only do they get their first sort of look at this guy, they get their eyes on the body of this guy. And as shocking as anything was just the violence and the speed of the attack. It visually confirmed what all of these other crime scenes had told police, that this was really just a ferocious, scary predator, because he set upon this woman with such speed and such force, threw her into the car, drove her off, sexually assaulted her, killed her. Her body found a short time later. In the wake of so many killings at this point, the community was just on razor's edge.
But authorities won't have time to rest. Another killer is on the loose. And July 1st, he strikes again. This time wounding Diane Bien and Jeremy Ortiz in 2 separate instances that night. With so many shootings, how can there be no witnesses?
One of the most effective things about the serial shooter style of mayhem was they took people from behind and people who weren't expecting to be assaulted. And this is why they have very little witness testimony, because people are just walking down the street and they get shot from behind and they never see what happened.
27-year-old Ashley Armenta is walking down the street when the assault happens.
When Ashley came into the hospital that night and they picked out the pellets from her scalp and police interviewed her, Ashley knew a lot about cars in general. She knew all about the model, make, year, everything. So she had a good idea of what the car was.
A light blue 1998 Toyota Camry. Despite other victims' descriptions, Ashley's is the first definitive answer to make and model of the vehicle.
One thing that was difficult for police is that when they did get a description of the car, people reported different colors. The paint on that particular car showed different in different light. It had different mixtures of paint in it, and different ones, purple, blue, gray, showed up in different light. So that explained why the color seemed different to different people.
Then, just a few days later, More carnage on the 12th of July when Raul Lopez Garcia is shot while riding his bike in Mesa. Just when they could use a break in the serial shooter's case, a lead comes in. A phone call that will change the course of the investigation. There are 2 active serial killers on the loose in Phoenix, Arizona. The serial shooter shoots unsuspecting pedestrians and cyclists, while the baseline killer commits rapes and murders, centering his attacks largely on and around Baseline Road.
The crimes that were committed by this serial shooter were very senseless. You couldn't put a motive to it. Who was going to shoot someone's dog at the end of the leash that they're walking? Who was going to shoot a horse in someone's backyard? Who was going to shoot a guy sitting on a bus bench? Who was going to shoot a guy trying to protect a dog? These are senseless. A rape case is very specific. The motivation is obvious.
The serial shooter victims have all been shot with a .22 caliber rifle or a .410 or 12-gauge shotgun from a moving vehicle identified as a late 90s Camry. The baseline killer uses a handgun.
With video evidence recovered from the previous attack of the baseline killer, police are able to release a composite sketch to the public. He appears in the video to be an African-American male.
The informant that really broke the case of the serial shooter was a man named Ron Horton. And Ron Horton was an old drinking buddy of Sam Deaton.
Sam was from the Midwest. He was from Minnesota, where he grew up, and his mother at times had come out here to Phoenix. As an adult, he became a union electrician, so he could work a good job, but he had trouble with his temper and his reliability, so he lost his union job. Ron Horton wasn't the kind of guy who watched news or read newspapers, so he wasn't really aware very much of the whole serial shooter crisis in the area. But one night he was at a bar with his friend Sam, and Sam said the strangest thing to him. He said, "Have you ever killed a man?"
Sammy apparently was one of those kind of guys when he got a belly full of beer, he shot his mouth off too much, and apparently had boasted to Ron that he had shot people.
Ron says, "No, what are you talking about?" And he noted this and thought this was really odd. Later, he did become aware of the serial shooter case, and in fact, a picture of Sam was circulated on the news from the Walmart fire. In June of 2006 was a bad month and a particularly bad night. There was a Walmart that was set on fire in the west side of the valley. One thing about Walmart is it has really good asset management, really good security. So they have cameras all throughout their stores. So the night of those 2 fires, they had people reviewing the video from every single camera, and they were able to determine that 2 guys probably set both fires. And they were able to take stills from the video, supply those to the police, which had them circulated on media. So now we had a picture of 2 guys with a distinctive tattoo and a distinctive T-shirt circulating for people to possibly recognize them. And Ron was fearful that maybe Sam was the guy in the picture, but he was divided because in his social circle, you don't snitch. And he felt really bad about maybe getting Sam into some trouble for no reason.
Ron didn't immediately act on this, and I think, as he would say himself, to his great regret. But in short order, after Ron had been told by Sam of the killings, a young woman named Robin Blasnick ends up being shot and killed in Mesa, Arizona. All the earmarks of the serial shooter.
Robin Blasnick was killed on the last day of July, and it was a fever pitch. I think everyone really felt electrified by Robin because she was such a vulnerable young girl that everyone felt like she was their daughter, their sister, and we thought, we can't take any more of this.
Ron Horton hears about the killing of Robin Blasnick. He thinks about his friend Sam Deaton talking about going around killing people. At that point, Ron Horton calls police and says, "I think my friend Sam Deaton had something to do with this." Police then asked Horton to set up a meeting with Sammy Dietman. They meet at a place called the Stardust Inn, a little bar on the west side. Police set up a surveillance, and they wait for Sam Dietman to show up.
They asked Ron to particularly tell Sam that he could not give him a ride home, that he'd have to have someone come pick him up. They waited till Ron left, and Sam was waiting for his ride, and they saw this car drive up and pick up Sam, and it sure looked like the other guy in the photo.
A guy named Del Hausner. And that is the first time cops had the name Del Hausner, but one of the lead investigators say he was sitting in that parking lot, and when he saw that Camry pull in, he said, "We got our guys."
Dale had 2 marriages under his belt. He moved on with other girlfriends, and he now had a little baby daughter with another woman. He was working for the city of Phoenix at the airport as a janitor.
Dale also works as a boxing photojournalist. He loves to feel like he's in the middle of big things.
From the moment Sam was picked up that night at the bar, those 2 men were never alone. They had a tale for the next 3 days of their lives.
They have a GPS monitoring device on Hausner's car, and Sam and Dale are just driving around aimlessly with cops following them.
The 2 men continue driving around Phoenix under police surveillance.
So they observed the car slowing down when there was a lone pedestrian. And so their strategy to prevent someone getting shot while they were watching was to speed up and get close and act like they were going to witness it, because they didn't have any way of stopping a shooting. They followed them back to an apartment in Mesa, and they had an emergency meeting with the county attorney to get an emergency warrant to do a bug in the apartment.
They went to the apartment next door, put up a monitoring device so they could listen to their audio.
They have a lot of surveillance on the apartment, and at one point they have Sam come out and take the trash bag from inside the apartment to the dumpster. One of the guys who's been hiding in the bushes jumps into the dumpster and pulls out that trash bag, and they hightail it down to downtown Phoenix to go through the bag. And what they find in it is further confirmation that they have the right guys. They find a map that's marked up with the sites of the murders. They have a soda can, pick it up, it rattles, dump it out. What's in there? A .410 shell.
The police want to make a move, but there's a problem. An unexpected person is at the apartment with them.
A complication has come up, and that is that during the time of the surveillance, Dale has picked up a very small child, about 2 years old, and brought it home with him. This is his own daughter, it turns out. And what was really awful on the tapes of the bug, they hear Dale teaching his daughter just to laugh about the killings.
Good night, Sam. Night. See you in the morning. See you in the morning. They don't kill anybody.
They can't do a raid with a baby inside there, so now they have to regroup. What are they going to do?
Anytime officers gather for the purpose of doing a forceful entry to execute a search warrant or effect an arrest of a suspect, they would have to do a risk assessment. They would have to do surveillance on the property to determine if the subject that they're looking for is present and who else may be present, and that would include the presence of children. And they would have to weigh very carefully whether or not it was worth taking the risk that an innocent child may be injured in order to continue their investigation at that point. If officers determine that a child is present and there is a person of interest or a suspect who may be armed and dangerous in that location, most often we would expect that they would continue the investigation, continue surveillance, and attempt to make that arrest at a time where there's less risk to innocent people.
But can this tactic work until they lawfully arrest the killers? Arizona resident Ron Horton has just heard some disturbing news. A longtime drinking buddy, Sam Dietman, has boasted that he and his friend may be the serial shooters. Ron has no choice but to let police know. Now, police are following Sam and his friend Dale Hausner. who are cruising around in a vehicle that matches the description given by witnesses to belong to the serial shooter. Police rush to get the necessary warrants together to bring the two men down.
So this was a very harrowing night for the cops. And they also had a helicopter overhead that was observing them. And when someone on the ground could not get close enough to the car to prevent a potential shooting, they actually had the helicopter buzz the car, fly low, so that the shooters would look up and go, oh, better not do it right now.
I know that one of the investigators who was there that night following this said it was one of the worst nights of his life because he felt as if he was following two known killers who were looking for another victim, and the police still needed to do their investigation, and their biggest concern was they were going to pull a gun out the window, and before the police could interact or intervene, another victim was going to go down.
After 2 days of surveillance and everything is in its place and the circumstances that are necessary have presented themselves, it's time to bring this nightmare that is the serial shooter to an end.
Once they identified these guys and got the audio from the neighboring apartment and all the evidence, they rounded these two guys up and hauled them downtown and booked them.
The things they find inside the apartment are telling. There are guns, ammunition, and even a scrapbook of news clippings following the investigation of the serial shooter and the baseline killer.
When police executed the raid at the Mesa apartment of Dale Hausner, they found a treasure trove of information, including a whole slew of weapons, I believe about a dozen firearms. They ended up doing, I think, most of the last shootings with a shotgun. They found a shotgun and shells and casings and all kinds of ammunition. So, they were not wanting for evidence in terms of firearms and ballistics.
Police search Hausner's car and find even more evidence that Hausner and Dietman are indeed the serial shooters that have plagued the Phoenix area for the past year. The city is elated, but Dale Hausner refuses to take responsibility for the murders.
You guys have never been together doing anything violent together?
Oh, no way. No. As far as I know, no, it's not. As far as I know, it's absolutely not. No, as far as any violence with us together, no.
But Sam Dietman has a different version of events.
We had heading up, I don't know what that goes, 32nd or 44th Street or something. So he's like, well, sit back. I'm like, all right, why? And the window starts going down. Bought this little shotgun. Fired at some fat guy who was walking down the road.
I think you're the mastermind of this entire operation, and have been from the get-go. But you involved Sam, and I think he was willing to go along.
He's shooting people, it's not with me.
No, it is with you.
Dale promptly held himself a news conference, which was a great spectacle. Dale Hausner wanted very much to be a talk show host or a circus ringleader. And a very flamboyant character, loved to talk.
On August 7th, 2006, Hausner goes public with a press conference declaring his innocence.
Why I'm here is because I have Sam Dietman staying with me for about 5 weeks, and apparently at night Sam had been taking my car out and using various weapons that I have in my house to commit crimes, and apparently they tracked it through my car, and when they came and busted in the house, I was there, and I guess I'm just guilty by association, even though I did not shoot anybody or kill anybody.
Dale Hausner could be what is described as a classic narcissist. He refuses to accept any responsibility. He's self-focused. He lacks empathy.
I mean, it could be anybody. I don't know, but the person's got to be smart, because they've been getting away with for a long time.
Just over a month later, the citizens of Phoenix, Arizona are handed another arrest. With DNA evidence from one of the rapes, in conjunction with the ring taken from Tina Washington's body and traces of her blood found on one of his shoes, the baseline killer is identified as ex-con and current construction worker Mark Goudreau. He is convicted of 9 murders among 90 charges. He is sentenced to 438 years in his first trial for rape and robbery, and finally to death on March 16, 2007. In the face of his crimes, Sam Dietman confesses to his involvement with the serial shooting and agrees to testify against Dale Hausner.
He flipped so quickly that night because I think he was not only tired of the crime spree, but I think he was tired of Dale. So when the police arrested the both of them, it was Sam's opportunity to get out from under the thumb of Dale and just get away from all of it, all the crimes and Dale.
Dale Hausner goes to trial on October 6, 2008. In a desperate attempt to get the audio evidence thrown out, Hausner's lawyer goes after the emergency wiretaps issued without a judge's permission. But the state prosecutor takes the stand to defend police's actions.
They had followed this vehicle. They were making wide U-turns. They were stopping at empty lots and behaving in a manner as if they might be casing various areas looking for people. I felt that it was necessary to act promptly to stop the killing.
Despite the defense's concerns, the recordings are played for all present to hear, and what the court hears is shocking.
They heard these two guys, these two knuckleheads, talking about news coverage and yucking it up about shooting people.
Oh my God, she looks familiar. Oh, Blasek? I know what Blasek.
They were mocking the death throes of their victims. They were congratulating each other on getting a higher number of murders.
It's now 3, they're total of 6. That's higher than that.
The state has heard enough. Dale Hausner is sentenced.
Of the 87 charges brought against Hausner, he's convicted of 80.
Despite appeals in 2008 and 2012, the convictions are upheld against Dale Hausner.
Dale was a wannabe. Boxing promoter, big guy, man about town. Even as a serial killer, he wanted to be a big-timer. There was never a moment where Dale said, I did this, and I'm sorry. Those are the kind of statements that may actually mean something to victims. Dale never had the fortitude to do that.
On June 19, 2013, Dale Hausner commits suicide by overdosing on antidepressants in his jail cell.
Phoenix is a pretty mobile city. A lot of people move in, a lot of people move out. The fact is, the people who are new here didn't know who he was, didn't really care. And those of us who did know, we already knew we were safe from him. You want to do a big dramatic gesture and kill yourself? Knock yourself out. Who cares? You're irrelevant now. And I think that is the worst possible hell Dale could have, is not to be important anymore.
Now, over 15 years later, the reign of terror and the summer of fear is a distant memory. The people of these communities have moved on and rebirthed themselves in the Valley of the Sun. After a long September day in 2003, it's just another night out with friends. But when you add a volatile love affair and a rash of violent home robberies in the area, ending in a brutal murder, detectives are faced with the puzzling question: who killed Michael DeHakis?
He is the last person that anybody would want to murder.
Situated in Pima County, Tucson is the second largest city in Arizona. Many refer to it as the oasis of the desert.
Tucson is a great town. The metropolitan area is about 1 million people, but Tucson likes to think of itself as a small town.
It's about a third the size of Phoenix, and it's the city that doesn't want to grow to be like Phoenix, so we're completely opposite as far as that goes. So it's very hometowny. Everybody seems to know each other, especially in the yoga community.
The Midtown area of Tucson. Although crime is typically higher in this part of the city, it boasts a vibrant arts and restaurant district, as well as many of the city's top urban attractions. Midtown is where most Tucsonians eat, drink, shop, and play.
We love our Mexican food. We love our festivals.
Michael DeHakis is a guy living life on his own terms, and that's just the way he likes it.
His home is in the Midtown region of Tucson. A lot of older homes there, quite a lot of traffic, not a particularly safe neighborhood.
It's got its pockets of crime-infested areas just like any other major city.
Friday, September 28th, 2003, at 6 a.m. While walking her dog, a neighbor discovers Michael's body. She calls 911.
The body was discovered on the front porch. She saw his body and saw that he clearly had some trauma.
The neighbor calls police, telling them there is a body and a lot of blood on the porch of a house on North Sparkman Boulevard. On-duty officers are on the scene within minutes.
We were called as a homicide team, I believe it was around 6 a.m., and when I arrived there were other officers on scene already, uniformed officers. All I was told, it was a dead male, possible homicide victim laying on his porch outside his residence. We did a walkthrough and we found the victim, Michael DeHakis, laying there on his porch, face up, on his back, and a lot of dried blood around his head. His body was warm to touch. Felt that he probably died within the last 8 to 12 hours.
The coroner identified his wound as a gunshot wound, did not find an exit wound, so the bullet was still in his head.
It was clear to us that the victim had been shot by a handgun or a rifle. We weren't sure at the time. Our next step is to canvass the area, talk to neighbors to see if they heard anything, heard any gunshots, things of that nature. Michael was a machinist by trade, so he had a workshop right outside his kitchen door. Neighbor across the street thought that Michael was alive on the day before. He heard Michael's compressor going on and off in his machine shop, so he felt that he was home because whenever Michael would use his machinery, the compressor would be on. Through Michael's cell phone that was in his bag, I was able to gather contacts from the phone, and we found his son. His son arrived.
Michael's youngest son identifies the body. The detectives set about interviewing friends and family to get a better understanding of who Michael was, and hopefully a lead that could point to a motive for the killing.
He seemed like a fun-loving person. He got along with everybody, kind of a free spirit. He had been married and divorced and had a few kids. They all loved him, and he got along with everybody. I think even his ex-wives got along with him very well.
It's apparent early on that Michael DeHakis definitely lived the hippie lifestyle. His home is in a low-income section of town that is known for its transient populations. And yet, everything detectives are being told about Michael DeHakis, what friends and family and known associates say about him, is that he's the most stable and reliable guy they know.
He was a very charismatic person, almost always had a smile on his face.
Everyone said wonderful things about Michael, that he was a caring person, he was a joyful person, just this nice, peaceful soul type of guy. The more you heard about him, the more you kind of wished that you met him.
My relationship with Michael initially was, he was my yoga instructor. A friend of mine introduced me to Michael because he was in his yoga class, and I had never taken yoga before, and so he introduced me to Michael, and we grew to be rapid friends. It's a person you could get along with very, very easily.
Besides his knowledge of yoga, his charisma might have had something to do with his popularity with the female students.
and he had long flowing hair, and he dressed like a hippie. He didn't have a car. He actually drove a bicycle everywhere he went, and the girls loved him.
Everyone said he was very charismatic, that he was flirtatious. He loved the women, and they loved him.
He is the last person that anybody would want to murder.
But someone did, and friends and family are shocked when it happens.
I drove home from work and was watching the local news when it came up with a news story of a murder that had occurred midtown. And I heard Michael's name mentioned as the victim of a burglary gone wrong.
When we got word that a man was shot to death on the front porch of his home, of course it sounded at first that it might have been a botched burglary.
We felt that we did have a foiled burglary, that the victim had come home and stopped the intruders. There appeared to be items stacked outside his residence. There was guitar cases, a violin case, a handbag was found on the sawhorse on the side of the house next to these stored violins and guitars. And there was a broken window in the front of the porch area. It looked like it went into a kitchen. Upon going into the residence, we were able to see that there were more musical instruments placed inside the kitchen door to go outside. There was an amplifier, a guitar stand.
And the thought was that perhaps because this was a neighborhood that had been burglarized frequently, that it was natural that the police started looking at known burglars.
We did find a large shoe print, like kind of a waffle shoe print outside the front door.
Could this be just another random attack gone wrong? Or has Michael's charisma attracted some unwanted attention?
There were many different scenarios coming through.
Both of them had been taken into custody, and the handgun was involved.
She had gotten drunk and pointed that pistol at her own husband.
Tucson, Arizona has a darker side. Crime, drugs, poverty, and a rash of home robberies in the Midtown area. Michael DeHakis, a yoga instructor in free spirit, is gunned down on his front porch in what looks like a robbery gone wrong.
We found items that were kind of a disarray in his bedroom. It looked like there was an area where there was a lot of musical instruments. Well, they weren't there anymore. They were out in the side yard.
The Tucson Medical Examiner estimates the time of death to be sometime late Thursday evening.
She felt that the rigor mortis had not set in anywhere from 3 to 5 hours from the time we found him at 6 a.m.
But determining time of death by measuring rigor mortis in the body is not an exact science.
Rigor mortis is a stiffening of the muscles. It's a chemical reaction, but it doesn't always tell you an accurate time of death. It's estimated. Unless you're there, you see the person die, that's where everything is an estimate.
The medical examiner shows detectives there is no exit wound.
We were able to turn the victim over and find there was not an exit wound. It was a defect that was against the skull in the back, consistent with the bullet still being in his brain.
Detectives check for a spent shell casing that would typically indicate an automatic handgun, but there is none to be found. They determine the weapon is most likely a revolver. A .38 caliber slug is retrieved during the autopsy, but an interesting star pattern around the entrance wound and hand scratches consistent with gun struggle piqued detectives' curiosity.
There was some burn patterns on the victim's forehead by the entrance of the wound, consistent with someone standing a few feet away and firing a handgun. It was close enough to leave the gassy particles of burn pattern on his forehead.
Everything detectives learn only substantiates the robbery theory.
Returning back to the police station, my partner and I went through all the most recent burglary arrests.
So they figured somebody had come in, burglarized it, and as they were walking out of the house, Michael was coming in, and that's when He got shot.
We contacted burglary detectives and found out that 2 known burglars had been arrested in the area of where Michael lived.
Robbery Division shows detectives 2 suspects, Joseph Keys and David Wynn.
They were known burglars in the area. The burglary that they were arrested for, I believe on Sunday evening, there was a guitar involved. So that kind of piqued our interest. We were excited about that. We went to the jail and interviewed these 2 individuals, and they were pretty much defiant and hardcore criminals serving prison time before. So we didn't get a lot of information from them, but one of them, we were able to do a search warrant on his house.
Police race to the suspect's home to search for evidence, hoping they can tie it to Michael's murder. Detectives find what looks like blood splatter on a bandana, pants, and shoes.
At that time, we felt very likely that we found our suspect and we had the right person.
Detectives send the bandana, pants, and shoe for blood analysis and request the shoe be matched against the footprint found at the crime scene. If the blood matches Michael's, their robbery hunch will have paid off.
We knew we had some more follow-up to do, but our team was excited about that.
While they await lab results, detectives continue to build a profile on Michael, following up with known contacts and family.
From the day the murder happened, just was nonstop. My time during the weekend after the murder, I spent contacting many of Michael's contacts that were in his cell phone. Cell phones were somewhat new at the time, so it was difficult.
As police started piecing together Michael's life and who knew him, who hung out with him, who he knew, it came up pretty quickly that he was seeing a woman who was younger than he was by about 15 years. She had been in his yoga class, but they started having an affair. And her name was Amber Trudell.
Amber's name was on the top of his contact list. I did leave a message with her, and she never got back to me.
Detective Jimenez finds it odd that Amber does not return his call after the killing. Detectives also recall Michael's kids relating their story of meeting Amber and the way she reacted to their dad spending time with them. For Michael, a devoted father to his 4 kids, Amber's erratic behavior creates stress in their relationship.
I had not known him prior to his relationship to Amber. He was flirtatious, and he had that type of personality, the look that fit the yoga instructor.
Michael is known to give private yoga lessons to students from time to time.
He gave her private lessons because she was rather shy and didn't like to go to the yoga class with everybody else.
But Michael and Amber's relationship quickly goes beyond student and teacher. They are lovers.
He described his relationship as being on and off. Not that it was volatile or anything like that, but they would be fine for a couple of weeks, and then she'd get mad at him, and then she'd stop seeing him, and then they'd go back on together. And I could see why Michael liked her. She was good looking. And it seemed like an odd match initially because of the fact that it was on and off all the time. But Michael was just having fun, which is what he did. She wanted Michael to change the way he looked. She was not happy with him dressing like a hippie, with sandals and long ponytail. She didn't like that look. So I thought that was a little bit odd, but yet she continued having a relationship with him.
Public opinion on the case puts pressure to find the killer. But the lab results they're waiting for are about to spin their investigation in a whole new direction. Michael DeHakis is shot to death in what looks like a robbery gone wrong. Detectives follow their hunch and question 2 burglars arrested for home break-ins in Michael's Midtown neighborhood.
We felt very likely that we found our suspect and we had the right person.
But blood analysis proves them wrong.
Blood on the jeans were not of our victims, so it was just excluded from my case.
And detectives are forced to start their investigation over. It's a major setback in the case. They've lost valuable time and now have to go back to square one.
At that point, we're somewhat stuck.
But the case is still active, and detectives need a break before it goes cold fast.
I received a call from Amber's employer, and that's when our interests turned towards Amber at that point.
Detectives discover Amber has worked at an accounting office for several years and is a very good employee.
And she gave us information that Amber said that she had to go out of town but would return to work on Monday. It was Tuesday. Her manager felt that it was not like Amber not to show up to work.
But that's not all her manager has to say.
Oh, by the way, Amber is married, and they live in Midtown.
But she's having marital problems with her husband, Justin Goodwin, that are distracting her. Now, detectives are looking at a possible love triangle crime. The question is, who shot Michael? Could Justin be the jealous husband who finds out his wife is having an affair with her yoga instructor?
There are so many questions that arise when you have someone having an affair with someone, but then somebody is killed in that love triangle. I mean, there are soap operas built on things like this.
Detectives visit the bagel shop where Justin works as a night shift baker. But they're surprised to learn he quits just 3 days after Michael DeHakis is found murdered. The manager and his staff tell them they've never met his wife, but they know there are problems because of a domestic violence arrest the year before.
We're able to do a records check on Amber. We did find that there was a previous arrest of her and her husband over a domestic violence type issue where a handgun was taken into evidence.
There was one incident early in their marriage where she had gotten drunk and pointed that pistol at her own husband. She didn't shoot him, but it was enough to call police out.
Both of them had been taken into custody, and that a handgun was involved, so I felt that we need to find Amber and speak to her.
But detectives have no luck contacting her or her husband.
The employer saw Amber's husband, Justin, and another male loading items from their house into a rental truck. So she called us. I had officers dispatched to the residence where Amber and Justin lived.
When officers arrive, they find Justin is armed.
And a handgun was taken from him. It was a semi-automatic Glock.
Detectives know it is not the murder weapon, since the Glock is a .40 caliber weapon, not a .38 caliber.
And he was taken to the police station for questioning, and that's when I spoke to Justin for the first time.
You not only have to look at Amber and Michael, but you have to look at Justin, her husband. Where was he? What did he think, and did he know about this going on? Where was he that week when Michael was shot?
But Justin denies knowing anything about Amber and Michael's relationship.
I didn't know anything up to that point about her having any kind of an affair.
It was hard to figure out where he was coming from because I didn't feel he was being truthful. I felt he did know where Amber was, but he stuck to his story that he and Amber were no longer together, that he was loading furniture because they were getting divorced and he was leaving, and he did not have any idea where she was.
So I guess that's not an alibi for me being up there in between the time frame that you guys say that I was supposedly doing whatever I was doing, or whatever you think I might have done, which I can tell you that I didn't do.
He was upset. I didn't have enough to arrest him on. A concealed handgun was just a misdemeanor at the time. Basically told him not to leave town and to please call us if Amber returned.
But something else very interesting happens during that initial interview.
During the interview with Justin, we had his cell phone in our custody in another office, and his cell phone kept ringing.
The officer answers it. It's a young female asking where Justin is and who has Justin's phone. When the officer identifies himself, she hangs up.
We did trace of the phone. The phone number that was dialed from was the office phone of Extended Stay America. We had officers in that area respond. They made contact with the manager.
Could the mysterious female caller in fact be the person of interest for the murder of Michael DeHakis?
The whole team is perplexed about this.
Was it a vindicative thing that the spurned lover did?
She was pretty angry that night.
We're thinking that we're letting the killer go.
Tucson yoga instructor is murdered in what looks like a home robbery gone wrong. But the case goes from a random robbery shooting to a possible love triangle.
Was this cheating, did it lead up to the murder? Was it a vindicative thing that the spurned lover did?
With a domestic violence charge a year prior, detectives focused their investigation on Michael's illicit lover, Amber Trudell. After tracing a series of calls made to Justin's cell phone during his interrogation, Tucson police converge on the Extended Stay America Hotel, where they find and detain the mysterious woman caller, Amber Trudell.
In her room, we spoke with her, took a statement from her. We knew that we had Justin in several lies, and she was lying to us as well. So we took Amber to the police station, and we further interviewed her there. At times, she was kind of perplexed in the fact that we were not taking her to jail.
Am I leaving after this, or am I going to jail?
Well, it depends on, are you going to incriminate yourself?
I'm just asking because I'm handcuffed to a table.
We felt that she was less than truthful with us as well. Her story's changed a few times.
If you didn't kill anybody, you've got nothing to hide, nothing to worry about. I need to eliminate you, and I can't eliminate you if you won't talk to me and tell me the truth.
She hadn't seen Michael in a while, and she did not admit to the killing him, but that she had seen him days before, that she'd been dating him.
If my fingerprints are there, I've been there so many times. Okay. And if my DNA is on him, I mean, we were lovers. Of course.
Denied any involvement in his death.
You're going to be a suspect until I can eliminate you.
Well, what does that mean, I'm a suspect? And what, I can't leave town? Or I can't leave the state? What does that mean?
She said that she had been with Justin for a few days before and didn't know where he was, not knowing that we had him in custody.
He's here?
He's here. You put him in the spot, not me.
He's being questioned right now?
Yeah, he was questioned. I figured we eliminate both of you guys, get it over with, and move on down the road.
Amber is visibly distraught to learn that her husband Justin is in custody, and she opens up to detectives.
I wasn't here on Friday, though, and people can verify that.
That's what I want to ask you about.
No, but I don't want to get into this thing where my husband is a suspect.
Amber tells detectives she left Michael that night and traveled 3.5 hours north up the I-60 to the lush city of Show Low, Arizona.
Apparently, right after Amber had had this argument with Michael, she and her husband left Tucson to go to the White Mountains up north. His mother and stepfather lived there.
According to Justin's stepfather, Amber had been drinking the whole time. She was outside crying at times, visibly upset. She pretty much drank all of his liquor. So he knew that there was something going on. From what Justin told us in his first interview, that Amber carried a gun, always carried it in her purse. We first asked Amber where her weapon was at the Extended Stay America, and she said, I don't have it, I don't know where it is. So it was not in her purse. She allowed us to search her purse.
Detectives push Amber for the truth, citing they know she has a gun based on her domestic charge a year ago.
She had no idea where her handgun was. After interviewing Justin and Amber, we decided to release them. We knew that they had an alibi, that they were in Show Low, Arizona, at Justin's parents' home the morning of the 27th when Michael was found.
The detective's case stalls hopelessly for a second time.
The whole team is perplexed about this. We're thinking that we're letting the killer go, but we don't have enough evidence to tie her to the crime because she has an alibi. The investigation has reached a standstill. We know that we have to get further information to determine what happened in this case.
That break comes when Justin's stepfather, a retired detective himself, can no longer ignore his curiosity.
Our next turning point is when Justin's stepfather calls us. He's curious about Amber being outside his residence, walking around crying, and he saw her behind the storage shed. He went back there and he started taking the rocks apart and determined that there was something buried underneath them, and he dug up a handgun. It was Amber's handgun. I immediately responded to Show Low, met with the detectives there, and took custody of the gun, drove it back to Tucson, and we had analysis done immediately. It was a snub-nosed .357 revolver. When I took custody of it, you could clearly see blood in the barrel of the handgun.
Within hours, detectives put the weapon through ballistics.
First, if they did any DNA on it, that's got to be done before any ballistics testing. Then ultimately it's checked for operability, it's test fired. Projectiles are compared to what was taken out of the victim from the autopsy, and it is found that they are a match.
Ballistics connect the weapon to the killer, but detectives also show something else.
What was really interesting about this, and I had never seen this in all my 17 years in homicide, was that we did a test fire of the weapon. It left a star pattern on the board that was nearly identical to the star pattern that the victim had on his forehead.
The case is starting to go their way. With an exact match of the blood found on the gun barrel to the victims, detectives must figure out how Amber Trudell murders Michael DeHakis when she's not in Tucson the Thursday that he dies.
I definitely knew something was off. I felt, along with others in the team, that perhaps he was killed days before. I met with the doctor. We had to change our timeline. When we found Michael had larvae in his eyes, and larvae doesn't set in immediately after a fresh kill. He'd been laying there for probably 2 days on his porch without anybody finding him.
Which to me is unreal. I mean, how could somebody lay in a pool of blood at their front door with the door wide open in a neighborhood where people walk them down and drive and not be found? But that's the way it happened.
In Tucson, our front porches aren't like the front porches in the Midwest where you have the nice little white railings and everything like that. It's more of a patio, and there are some bushes in front of it.
We also realized that Michael had been in rigor mortis after his death and had already gone out of rigor mortis, so his body was very relaxed. Late September was a very hot, humid day, so his body temperature was warm based on that.
Evidence is lining up against Amber Trudell, but detectives still have to establish a motive for an arrest warrant.
One of Michael's good friends, Eli, steps forward, and he says he has information about that Wednesday night and Amber Trudell's behavior that night toward Michael.
It wasn't until a week later when they had a ceremony for Michael in his honor. I was talking to several people after the ceremony, and I was explained that I just saw him that Wednesday night. He also said that he had not shown up for his yoga classes on Thursday, so since I had seen him Wednesday night, they thought that there was part of the puzzle there that could help the police discover what was going on.
Eli Curiel did come to our police station and gave me a very good interview as to what had taken place the night that Amber and Michael were at the bar together.
And I talked about the argument they had and the fact that she wanted to marry him, insisted on him marrying her, and she was pretty angry that night.
Michael invites Amber to join the yoga group for the ritual beer night.
We usually had happy hours right after our Wednesday class. We would go to a local bar, have a couple of beers. Amber had parked on the opposite side of where Michael had parked. So as we were departing, he didn't walk her to her car. He went to the back. And so she was a little bit angry about the fact that he didn't walk her to her car.
She was talking to Eli as to why Michael didn't love her and why Michael didn't want to be with her all the time.
And she just kept on and on. Tell him to marry me. Tell him to marry me. And I said, I can't tell him that. He's been married several times before, and he doesn't want to get married right now, but he still likes you. And she wouldn't have any of that. She was very angry.
Michael, Amber, and Eli decide to go to a second bar for another drink.
They started in with a little bit of an argument. So I left, and the two of them were sitting there having an argument, and that's the last time that I saw them together.
I was able to determine from interviewing people at the second bar that Michael and Amber were at that they left together in late hours of the evening. And it's very consistent with Amber being with him and shooting him and killing him either late Wednesday evening or early Thursday morning.
This proves, together with the re-established time of death, that Amber no longer has an alibi. Detectives have enough to get their arrest warrant.
Well, we can't find Amber. She's not returned to work. I get hold of her employer. I get hold of Justin. Justin tells me that she'd left town. Maybe she went to Colorado. She's got a former boyfriend there.
She's nowhere to be found. She's not in Tucson. They don't know where she is.
Amber Trudell has just become a fugitive on the run. A yoga instructor's volatile extramarital affair with his student lead to his brutal murder. Detectives recover the murder weapon and, after re-establishing the time of death, debunk her alibi. Fearing arrest for the murder of Michael DeHakis, Amber Trudell is a fugitive on the run.
I had never or characterized Amber as being a cold-blooded murderer. But I didn't know a lot about her. Nobody had a clue that she was married. Nobody knew that. So I assumed that she was single, and I believe everybody else did. And I was shocked, I was floored that she turned into a maniac, devil, crazy woman that was completely opposite of what I knew of her before the murder.
But regardless of what anyone thinks of Amber, she's now a fugitive. The news goes out across the country.
We were working closely with the Marshal Service at the time. They had agents back east watching Amber's grandmother's house in upstate New York.
U.S. Marshals alert Detective Ben Jimenez that Amber has switched vehicles.
We determined that Amber had sold the white pickup to a car dealership in Connecticut and traded it in for a red Chevy Blazer, I believe.
Amber signs the sales agreement using her brother's Plainville, Connecticut address. The Marshal Service tracked the Blazer to her grandmother's house in New York, behind a storage shed.
And they were able to determine that Amber was there. They saw her coming and going from the house to the Chevy Blazer at times. They took her into custody, determined that she may be going into Canada.
United States Marshals arrest Amber Trudell for the murder of Michael DeHakis.
She was in a lot of denial. I told her she was under the arrest for her boyfriend at the time, Michael DeHakis, that we had the handgun, that it matched up, and she didn't want to answer questions at that point.
They escort her back to Tucson to stand trial for first-degree murder.
I was writing crime for the Tucson Citizen newspaper. By the time they arrest someone and they start going to show up in court, that's when I took over the case and started writing about this murder case.
March 2005. Amber has her day in court.
Everybody wanted to know Amber's story. Why did she leave? If she was innocent, because we started hearing that it was self-defense, there had been an argument. Was it suicide? Was she an abused partner? There were many different scenarios coming through as she appeared in court for her hearings and her public defender started filing motions.
The public defender portrays Amber as the victim of Michael's sexual predator tactics over his younger and vulnerable yoga student.
We had two very different competing images of Michael, the victim. Was he the fun-loving, charismatic hippie who wouldn't harm anybody, who everybody liked? Or was he an abusive, violent, controlling lover who took over Amber's life?
The prosecution paints a very different scenario. That of a manipulative woman deluded with her illicit love affair who loses her temper when Michael rejects her ridiculous pleas for marriage.
And so, as you're watching her, you're wondering, is she what she says she is? Was this very quiet, meek person capable of cold-blooded murder? Of putting a gun to the forehead of the man she supposedly loves and killing him? It was very intriguing to watch this playing out in the courts with all these different scenarios, nobody quite knowing who was the real Michael and who was the real Amber.
In a landmark move for a murder trial, Amber and her lawyer decide to let her testify.
She had a compelling story, and she appeared to get emotional and set up a case so that Michael was the one who brought about his death.
She said that Michael got mad because she said she had told him that she had to go back to her husband. As she's getting ready to leave, she grabs her purse and her gun, and that he got down on one knee and grabbed the hand and the gun from her and put the gun up to his head and said, "Shoot me because I'm a bad man and I treated you poorly."
And somehow that gun went off. That's Amber's story. Meantime, his friends and family had come forward and said, no, that Michael was actually thinking of breaking up with her.
I don't believe her version because it's contrary to everything that anybody knew about Michael. There wasn't a mean bone in his body.
And again, you're watching Amber in the courtroom being very passive, very quiet.
We all felt that she was not telling the truth. And the way she described it, the gun was at his forehead, and we felt this couldn't be because there wasn't a contact wound left that was more consistent with being shot from a distance.
So everyone wondered, is the jury going to buy this? Are they going to let her go?
The first trial ended up in a hung jury. There was one juror that felt that Amber was innocent.
For the people of Tucson, the murder of the yoga instructor in Midtown has now entered the truly bizarre. But for family and friends still coping with his loss, the mistrial is a devastating blow. Many wondering why certain aspects of Amber's violent past are not even entered as evidence.
Now, one of the things that did not come out in trial, there was a audio tape that was made by her husband that was not brought into evidence. And that audio tape was very revealing about her character when she drank. The tape reveals her screaming at the top of her lungs, drunk, threatening to kill her husband.
So even though a mistrial was declared and a jury couldn't reach their verdict, that didn't mean that Amber was free to leave. Prosecutors had every intention of trying her again. And so months after the mistrial, Amber was on trial again.
The second trial came 6 to 8 months later, and the prosecutors decided to go for second-degree murder.
In the second trial, because we all knew what she was going to say, I was watching her body language. When she was talking about the details of the shooting, she kept her eyes on the floor. A lot of time, the experts will say that is proof of a lie. She doesn't want them to see the lies in her eyes.
Amber Trudell is convicted of second-degree murder and is sentenced to 13 years in jail.
I did not particularly like the 13 years. I thought that it should have been more. The family felt the same way. Of course, it was up to the judge to make the determination.
I've covered a lot of murder cases in my career. And this case, Amber Trudell, does stand out as one of the most interesting ones because of the human drama and the tragedy of someone like Michael. Certainly the world can use many more Michaels.
Every time September 24 comes around, I do think of Michael, and we reminisced about Michael and his character and what we would have probably been doing if he was still around. The fact that he was gone way too soon was a tragedy, and we just miss him dearly.
In the virtually crime-free Amish community, members separate themselves from the world to find simplicity and godly self-reliance. But not everyone adheres to the rules.
He had a lot of girlfriends. He had a cell phone.
The Amish are a forgiving people, but some sins are greater than others.
He discovered she was lying there and there was blood all over.
Lies and deception run deep, and nothing is simple in the heart of Amish country. Wayne and Holmes County, Ohio, home to the largest population of Amish in the United States.
The Amish came to the American Midwest about 250 years ago, fleeing religious persecution in Europe.
They exist without electricity, plumbing, and many things we take for granted.
So their life is still pretty much as it has been for more than 200 years.
They feel that they can be closer to God if they don't have the conveniences that we have.
Within this low-crime community, there are only 2 reported murders among the Amish in America in more than 250 years. Eli Weaver and Barbara Miller are born into the Andy Weaver sect of the Amish and meet as teenagers.
The Andy Weaver sect is one of the most conservative of the Amish sects. There are several different groups within the Amish in Ohio.
The churches aren't structured, but every week they take turns and meet in barns. They follow the Bible's instruction not to be conformed with the world and protect themselves from outside influences, such as radio, TV, and the internet. No modern technology is allowed. No computers or even cell phones. In this community, there is group access to one shared telephone in a shanty-style booth.
The phone booth is one that they use regularly for their calls. It's not just an emergency, but it's like neighbors share the phone.
As well as no modern technology, an Amish person may only drive a horse and buggy. So if they require a car ride, they are allowed to hire what they term an English driver.
That's just their way of distinguishing between other people and people who are like them. Then they say like the English or the Mennonites when they're referring to a driver to come and pick them up.
Eli and Barbara get to know each other as teens over Sunday meals, barn raisings, or when somebody is married.
The Amish are what are called Anabaptists. They believe that everybody has an individual right to decide if they're going to become baptized and stay in the Amish community.
The couple become close during Rumspringa, the time in an Amish youth's teenage life when they are allowed to experiment.
Rumspringa is the process of a teenage Amish child living English, trying out these things they want to try. It's not too uncommon to have Amish kids involved in a drinking party where there's underage alcohol consumption.
Barbara Weaver was born Barbara Miller, and she had what I think of as a very typical childhood. The way that she spent her Rumspringa years as a teenager was not pushing the boundaries and drinking and driving and carousing, but she would have girlfriends over. They read Amish romance novels, and it was just as innocent as you can imagine. Eli always had a reputation as a troublemaker. Even as a child, his mother said that he would want to get away with everything.
Eli Weaver experiments during Rumspringa.
We don't know if this kind of bad boy image appealed to Barbara Miller. She must have seen something in him that she thought would make a good husband and father, because that's what they're looking for.
If you decide to not become Amish after Rumspringa, you must part from your family. You can still see each other occasionally, but you're giving up a lot.
I believe it's a way to not have anybody living Amish who doesn't want to be.
Eli and Barbara choose to stay with their families and community. They get baptized, and then, after a short courtship, wed.
Eli and Barbara were very young when they got married, about 20 years old, and they would have had a ceremony in the Sunday barn and a big lunch afterwards.
They have 5 children and firmly settle into the traditional Amish way of life.
It's important to keep things within the Amish community because they don't want to live like the rest of us. They honor their faith by living separately.
The Weavers moved to Maysville in Wayne County to be closer to Barbara's family. It's there that Eli goes on to open a hunting business. He also works as a hunting guide.
He carried fishing rods and shotguns and everything that the hunter and fisherman needed. That was a really great idea for him because he wasn't a farmer. It was something that he had interest and expertise in.
His business is successful, and Eli and Barbara raise their children and live the typical Amish life. June 2nd, 2009. Barbara sleeps alone in the wee hours of the morning. Only her and the children in the house. Sometime later, an armed intruder enters the Weaver household through the unlocked door. As a thunderstorm rages outside, the lurker moves slowly through the Weaver household in search of something or someone. The sound of the storm masks the stranger's footfall. The ultimate destination is the master bedroom. Barbara Weaver is asleep when the intruder enters. The morning of June 2nd, one of the Weaver children tries to wake his mother up, but can't.
She was wearing a nightgown, and she was lying on her right side, and there was a huge wound in her chest.
He runs to a neighbor's house and tells her his mother won't wake up, and her feet are cold.
She then went to the community telephone and called the sheriff's office.
911, do you have an emergency?
Yes, we do. Person not responding.
Did you know if the person is breathing?
No, I don't think she's breathing.
I had no idea what was going on. I happened to glance back down the alley and I saw 3 sheriff's cars. And I said, what on earth is going on back there? And then her sisters told me that Barbara had been found unresponsive and bloody, and everyone was just in shock.
It's inconceivable to friends and neighbors that the young, vibrant, and peace-loving Barbara Weaver, a pillar of the Amish community, is dead. And the question everyone is asking, where is Barbara's husband, Eli? In the tight-knit Amish community of Wayne County, Ohio, the ultra-conservative Andy Weaver sect has strict rules of conduct that all members adhere to. Eli and Barbara Weaver marry young, have a large family, and live the typical Amish life. But in the early morning of June 2nd, 2009, while Barbara is alone at home with the children, someone sneaks into the house and fires a shotgun at the sleeping figure in Eli's bedroom. In the morning, Barbara Weaver can't be roused.
The children went to the next door neighbor and asked for help. They said, I think my mom's dead, and the neighbor didn't want to believe it. She came over and then she discovered that she had been shot, and she went to the phone booth then to call for help.
Police and ambulance arrive on the scene. Deputies secure the house. Barbara Weaver is non-responsive. Authorities quickly learn from the neighbors that the couple's marriage is not an easy one, but the Amish are a non-violent people, so it seems extremely unlikely that this incident involves the Amish.
Murder among the Amish is really unusual and very rare.
So a crime this serious occurring to an Amish person is certainly news. It's very unusual. Occurring to an Amish woman makes it even more unusual.
The Weaver home is examined for clues by authorities. At 11:30 a.m., the coroner arrives. Barbara Weaver is officially pronounced dead.
A burglary was pretty easy to rule out initially. There was nothing touched in the house. There were valuables that were out. This appeared to be somebody walked in the house, shot Barbara Weaver, and then walked out and walked past valuables both times.
Police discover that at 3 a.m. that morning, Eli leaves with a party of friends for a fishing trip. Eli is contacted through the driver, who, being non-Amish, has a cell phone. Eli isn't given much information, but is told that his wife Barbara is non-responsive.
Between Eli and the men he was fishing with, they learn that something's happened. And so they stop and form a small prayer circle.
The group packs up their fishing gear and hurries back to Maysville.
Eli's friend Steve is driving them back to town, and the sheriff's deputy calls Steve, the driver. And Steve says, well, I'm just going to take Eli home. And the sheriff's deputies say, no, you're coming right to the sheriff's office. And you're not dropping Eli anywhere.
When Eli returns, he meets with detectives and gives a statement. Eli denies any involvement in his wife's death. Eli tells detectives that his wife helps him get ready for his fishing trip when he oversleeps, and that's the last time he sees her alive.
It's my belief the spouse is the suspect in 90% of the cases and is probably guilty of the murder in 95% of the cases. And I remember telling him, but at the same time I was informed that he had an alibi. He was nowhere near the scene of the murder.
Police want to do a lie detector test, but Eli's attorney refuses.
I informed them that I believed I had an innocent client. We would not be doing that test today, but I thought he would be cooperating fully in their investigation to help them find the person that did it.
His alibi appears to be airtight. Eli signs papers permitting the search of his house and business.
They, after a while, took him home and had him change his clothes so they could take his clothes. They tested his hands for gunshot residue. There was nothing.
Investigators have the projectile that killed Barbara Weaver, but no murder weapon.
A lot of times we get the gun. A lot of times we don't. A lot of times the gun disappears, and all we have is the bullet, possibility of what guns fired it, and that's it. We don't have nothing else.
Police collect 2 .410 gauge shotguns from Eli's gun shop. Examination of a firearm can include the rifling, which may reveal the brand or model of the firearm that fired a bullet.
Rifling characteristics. Every gun has it. Inside the barrel you have cutouts that are called glands and grooves.
But inside, most shotgun barrels are a smoothbore, non-rifled surface.
Those shotguns, they have no ballistic value unless you have a shell casing. But when you have no rifling involved, there's no ballistic value with that particular firearm.
But what police notice in Eli's gun shop is that there is a box of .410 slugs with 1 slug missing. June 3rd, the day after the murder, phone messages are checked at the community phone booth, which is located just outside of Eli's store. One new voicemail from an unidentified male states, Eli, you can run, but you can't hide. Obviously, we got the wrong person last night.
They were trying to aim at him and they got his wife instead.
This message is interesting to police because Eli admits a secret to them in his interview.
When the police were questioning him, he had admitted that he had an affair with other women.
Did Eli's affairs turn dangerous and inadvertently catch his wife in the crossfire?
Someone was trying to kill Eli, walked into a dark room. If you think about it, there's no electricity in an Amish home. There's no lights to turn on. Went into the master bedroom and shot the body in the bed.
Eli's lovers could be the key to the murder.
There was a lot of roads to go down in the investigation, a lot of angles to look at as defense counsel here to try to figure out, one, how to represent my client, but two, how to assist law enforcement in finding the person that did this.
As the investigation heats up, initially the Amish people who know the Weavers are quiet.
The Amish were told not to talk about it because they tend to be very clannish and circle the wagons whenever they feel like they're being attacked.
But soon, people will start to talk, and authorities will be led deep into the untold secrets of Amish country. Barbara Weaver, a young Amish wife and mother, is found shot dead in her bed. Her husband Eli confesses he is restless in the marriage. Police would consider him the prime suspect, but Eli leaves on a fishing trip with friends just before the killing and has an airtight alibi. An anonymous message left on the community phone makes it sound like it is Eli and not Barbara Weaver who is the intended target. Forensic experts find the victim, Barbara Weaver, is killed by a single shotgun blast to the right side of her chest.
The forensics people carefully measured the wound and concluded that the shot was made by a .410 gauge shotgun.
Several shotgun pellets are removed from the corpse. They also find bruising on her hands and neck.
They found a lot of powder burns on the blanket that had been covering her and on the nightgown. There was no gunpowder residue on her hands, so it wasn't a self-inflicted wound.
In the wake of the murder, women contact police about Eli Weaver. They claim they meet Eli over a dating chat site. Eli appears to have access to a cell phone and computer, both forbidden to the Amish.
They discovered that he had many more girlfriends than what he had said. He told each one they were the only one, and he was really cozy up to one, and then after a while another, and he was just kind of using all of them and not really wanting to attach to anyone in particular. And all the while he's a married man with 5 children.
Eli's online profile asks, quote, "Who wants to do an Amish guy?"
Eli posted a photograph of himself nude from the waist up and went by the moniker Amish Stud. He attracted a lot of women who were interested in that because, that was forbidden. Barbara's diaries and letters talk about how controlling Eli was, but also very plainly that he wanted a form of sex from her that she wasn't comfortable giving, and that was a main point of contention between them.
As well as multiple affairs, Eli leaves his wife in 2006 to live with a, quote, English woman named Christine. He comes back after 6 months, but 2 weeks later, he leaves his wife and children again. Barbara confides a lot with her sister Fanny.
When Eli found out that Barbara was writing to a counselor and getting letters in return, she had the letters go through Fanny's address so that Eli wouldn't know.
But Eli is unable to leave for long.
He went back to the Amish life, and he would have to have repented to the bishop. And both times, he was forgiven and taken back into the fold.
After his transgressions, the Amish spirit of forgiveness ensures Eli will again enjoy the support of his community.
They had shunned him, excommunicated and shunned him, but then he was welcomed back when he said he wanted to make things right again.
Despite being forgiven, some community members are still suspicious of him. But there is one local person who is with Eli frequently that perhaps no one suspects. Eli previously works in construction, and it's there he meets his co-worker's wife, Barbara Raber.
Barb Raber was raised Amish, but she was living an English lifestyle. She had a husband, she had a couple of children, and part of her employment was to drive Amish around and charge them for the travel.
They, at some point, began to have sexual encounters in her car or in the woods or in his barn, and she gave him a laptop, and she gave him a cell phone.
Through his girlfriends, police learned that not only does Eli have his own cell phone, but that he has murder on his mind.
They were sharing with the detectives that Eli would jokingly say to them, you know, if you see my wife, will you run her down? Or how much would it take to pay somebody to poison my wife?
None of them were interested in doing that.
She knew Eli had been exploring murder methods, and he had asked her if she would help kill his wife, and she was pretty convinced that he'd had a role in the murder.
Detectives want to get more concrete evidence.
She's wearing a wire, a bug, and she's actually left the police station, is in her car, when Eli phones. She asks him about what happened to his wife.
She and Eli discuss the murder. Though he gives no incriminating information away, police now have his phone number. They get a subpoena for the phone records and learn that Barbara Raber has been giving Eli some interesting gifts.
She paid for his cell phone and the calls, and eventually she paid for cell phones that Eli was giving to some of his girlfriends.
Meanwhile, police make headway with the mysterious phone call left on the community phone.
It never added up to anything. I think they could tell right away that it was fake. It was a very bad fake call.
It clearly showed, in my mind, a consciousness of guilt, trying to create a smokescreen or a distraction for the investigators.
And the voice is easily identified by people in the community.
They all said, that's David Weaver. And then they went to David Weaver, who said, yes, Barb Raber asked me as a favor for Eli to leave this message.
Barbara Raber's name comes up all too frequently in the investigation.
When it was discovered that Eli had a cell phone with him, they got access to the phone, and they did request the cell phone carrier preserve any text messages and activity on that phone.
Authorities learned that from May 30th to June 2nd, 2009, Barbara Raber and Eli exchanged text messages about methods of murder.
The texts were saying things like what kind of poison would work for her. They were researching that a little bit, and then finally Eli said, I don't care how you do it, just do it.
Graphic texts such as, maybe you could blow up the house. What about your kids? The kids will go to heaven because they're innocent. Alert police to a conspiracy to commit murder.
And then finally they settled on a shotgun. They didn't actually say shotgun, but that was kind of what the implication was. And then Eli said, just go up to the bedroom and get it done.
On June 10th, 2009, detectives arrest both Eli Weaver and Barbara Raber.
When Eli is brought out of the house, his children watching, his legs give way, and he has to lean on the back of the sheriff's car before he gets inside. Almost the same thing with Barb Raber. Her legs give way, and she's more vocal than Eli is. She says right away, will I have an attorney? Is there an attorney there for me? She also says to the deputies, it doesn't look good, does it?
I was surprised when that happened, but in talking with the officers and looking at the reports, then I saw a little closer, a little more of the picture that they had, and thought their decision probably was justified with what they knew. But then they continued to investigate and really put a pretty solid case together based on circumstantial evidence, but overwhelming circumstantial evidence of Eli and Barbara Raber's guilt.
Barbara Raber admits to police she has an affair with Eli, but insists it ends 6 months earlier. She is adamant she did not commit murder, and that she has an alibi.
Barbara said she was home all night, and her husband knows that. His husband was there, too.
But Eli says it is his lover, Barbara Raber, who commits the murder.
He continued to point the finger at Barb Raber. He said he didn't know what had happened, but implicated Barb.
The day after Barbara Raber's arrest, she has a change of heart and admits she goes to the Weaver house around 4 a.m, armed with a .410 gauge shotgun. She says her only intent on the night of the murder is to frighten Barbara Weaver. But then something unexpected happens. Eli Weaver does not follow the rules of his Amish sect. He has multiple affairs and even leaves his family twice. But when he begs forgiveness from his church, he's welcomed back. Barbara Weaver states she's not afraid of her philandering husband, but she is afraid of his girlfriends. Soon afterward, she is found shot to death in her bed. Barbara Rayber, Eli's longtime affair, admits to sneaking in the Weaver house the night of the murder with the intent to scare Barbara Weaver.
In her first unrecorded statement, she mentioned walking down the hallway towards the bedroom and seeing somebody sit up on the couch, which the only way she could have known that is if she was in the house. That was one of the relatives' children spending the night on the couch.
But then, according to Barbara Rayber, a terrible mistake happens.
Barbara Rayber claimed that she just went in to scare Barbara Weaver and the gun accidentally went off.
But authorities find Barbara Rayber's accidental shooting story improbable. The texts police have seen between Barbara Rayber and Eli show a cold-blooded killing, orchestrated by Eli and carried out by Barbara Rayber.
I remember some of the text messages from the night of the murder, her telling Eli, I think it's like 3:30 in the morning, she's scared, she didn't know if she could get through with it, how is she going to get in the house, where should she park, him explaining that the basement door is open, there's a flashlight there for her. She was looking for him to give her strength to pull this off, and he was willing to keep pushing her and giving her the information, giving her the incentive, the encouragement to go in the house and do what she did.
And she felt like she just had to do it because she was doing it for him.
Barbara Rayber appears to be someone who Eli Weaver can easily manipulate. She shows herself to be a supporter who is always there for Eli. Maybe even when it comes to helping Eli plan his wife's murder. As Barbara Rayber writes in a text, quote, I thought if we could get that fly poison stuff in a spice cupcake, she might not detect it.
The moment that Barbara Rayber is arrested, they have a search warrant and they go in to search her house. It's kind of tough because she was a hoarder. It was so bad that it was mentioned twice at her trial, how difficult it was to search her house. They found a laptop that she had sort of hidden, and they found that she had searched 841 times for poisons, using searches such as quickest way to kill a person or easiest way to kill somebody.
Police learned that a few weeks before the murder, possibly inspired by Barbara Rayber's research on poison, Eli tries to kill his wife, Barbara Weaver, himself.
She took a sip and she knew instantly something was wrong and she spit it out. And she asked him, Eli, what was in this? And he said it was sleeping pills. He was trying to kill himself. But I think she knew. She wasn't that stupid that she wouldn't have known that he was actually meaning for her to drink it.
Even after the incident, his wife, Barbara Weaver, stays with Eli.
It's a sacred thing among the Amish that you stay in your marriage and you work things out. You don't just leave. It's not an option to divorce.
After his failed attempt at murder, texts show that Eli encourages Barbara Rayber to do the job for him.
He could pretty much just get her to do what he wanted.
And she thought they were going to have a life, and she would do this for him.
Despite Barbara Rayber's apparent act of devotion, after the murder, Eli quickly distances himself from her.
The next time that Eli's questioned, he brings up Barb Rayber, and he says that she's in love with him, crushing on him, and that she might have killed his wife, and she wants him herself.
On August 17, 2009, Eli Weaver agrees to plead guilty to conspiracy to commit murder. As part of the plea deal, he promises to testify for the prosecution at Barbara Rayber's murder trial.
Eli really didn't care what happened to Barb Rayber in all of this. He was throwing her to the wolves.
Eli saw everybody around him as sort of supporting actors in the play or the movie of Eli Weaver's life.
Barbara Rayber, however, doesn't want a deal. She wants to go to trial and have her day in court.
She wants a trial because she believes she can prove she's innocent.
The Barbara Rayber murder trial gets underway on September 16, 2009. Gun store owner Larry Miller takes the stand and testifies that the defendant Barbara Rayber purchases a 410 on November 15, 2008. David Weaver describes the message he left at Barbara Rayber's request on the community phone that attempts to confuse police about the shooting.
He just said that's the kind of thing you do for a friend.
David Weaver also mentions that he lends Barbara Rayber a 410 gauge shotgun in the past that she never returns.
Her attorney worked very hard to propose a different scenario, and that is that Barbara Rayber was never at the house, or she was at the house and didn't fire the gun.
Defense proposes that Barbara Weaver is murdered by her husband, Eli Weaver, before he even leaves for the fishing trip, just after 3 a.m.
The medical examiner said she'd been dead a few hours when her son found her, and they narrowed it to, I believe, between 1 and 7 o'clock in the morning.
This timeline gives Eli ample opportunity to kill his wife before he leaves the house early that morning. In addition to the shotgun wound, Barbara's body has unexplained contusions, scratches, and bruising. Defense argues Eli is a murderer trying to frame his girlfriend, Barbara Rayber.
What worked in her defense is that they couldn't show that Barbara Rayber had ever been in that house. Not one fingerprint, not one trace of anything else. It was as if nobody had been in that house except Eli and his kids.
Eli Weaver has motive and opportunity, and so does Barbara Rayber. Although prosecution has no murder weapon, no fingerprints, and no sign of forced entry.
She had several different versions of what happened that were inconsistent with each other, inconsistent with the evidence, too. In her initial interview with law enforcement, Barbara Rayber claimed that she just went in to scare Barbara Weaver and the gun accidentally went off. But then she later claimed she was never in the house.
Following testimony from the medical examiner and several police officers, and with the case hanging in the balance, a surprising witness takes the stand. Two former lovers battle in court to place the blame for murder. The victim's husband, Eli Weaver, and his lover, Barbara Rayber. Both have motive and opportunity. Barbara Rayber's cellmate from Wayne County Jail is sworn in to testify. According to this witness, Barbara Rayber admits to her that she purchases a 410 gauge shotgun after Eli Weaver, on numerous occasions, begs her to murder his wife. A compelling story against Barbara Rayber takes shape. Rayber also asked the cellmate if she knows how long a fingerprint can last on a gun. Barbara Rayber gives police inconsistent statements, initially denying any involvement, and then later claiming Weaver's death is accidental.
You can argue conflicting theories and tell the jury either one of these could be true, but I don't think you can go to a jury and say, I didn't do it, and also I did it because he made me. I think that sort of inconsistency weakens both of those arguments.
Barbara Rayber confesses to killing the victim with a gun accidentally and from afar, but that doesn't match the forensics.
The autopsy of Barbara Weaver showed that it was a shotgun shot to her chest, fairly close range. There was powder residue, what we call stippling, on the sheet that was on top of her, which indicated the barrel of the shotgun was 6 inches to 12 inches, I believe, from her chest.
She exchanges text messages with Eli both directly before and after Barbara Weaver's murder, placing herself at the scene.
There were several avenues where she could have obtained a gun. There was a call from Barbara Rayber to her husband asking him to get rid of that thing. She didn't identify it as a gun. I think she mentioned it was in a camper and a trailer on the property. He denied ever doing anything, but police went out there and never found any weapon in the camper.
Eli Weaver testifies against Barbara Rayber and notes that after he speaks of wanting to be rid of his wife, Rayber suggests poisoning his wife, suffocating her, or killing her with a firearm. Eli explains that the detailed text messages he and Barbara Rayber exchanged that clearly show her plan to murder his wife, including a text message in which she suggests the day of the murder, June 2nd, quote, would be a good day to do it. After the murder, Eli receives a text message from Barbara Rayber asking that he not give up the cell phone, showing her awareness of its damaging content.
Barb Rayber and technology never got along very well. We know it was the text messages that implicated her.
She also sends a text message to Eli asking him how to clean a gun so it will not appear as if it has been fired, and asking him what she should tell her husband if he discovers that the .410 gauge shotgun is missing.
She thought when she was in jail awaiting trial that she could phone her sister and friends and her husband, and that the jail wouldn't know what she was saying if they spoke in Dutch, which is the main language there. So she just said all kinds of things in Dutch that implicated herself. And of course, the police department got a neighboring detective who speaks Dutch, and he came over and translated everything.
On October 1st, 2009, the jury finds Barbara Rayber guilty of aggravated murder and is sentenced to life in prison.
The community had suspected all along that Eli was involved. It was kind of a shock to learn that Barbara was involved because they didn't think she was capable of such a thing. There was a lot of shock and horror there, and members of Barbara's church were really shocked too. They didn't think she was capable of murder.
In Barbara Rayber, Eli finds the perfect patsy.
Barb came from a very troubled family. They were Amish. There were 4 young sons who died of a very unusual disease when they were all quite young. Then her parents adopted her and a couple of sisters. So there was just always this terrible feeling of tragedy and loss underlying everything in her family.
I understood that Barbara went along with Eli because she wanted to feel validated. She wanted to feel like she's really someone important. And she didn't get that from her family.
The children of both Barbara Weaver and Barbara Rayber inherit a terrible legacy of violence.
Now they have one parent dead and one in prison, and they're being raised by relatives, and it's been really hard for the children.
There's a larger trend now among the Amish to allow law enforcement into the community.
They've been willing to report those crimes, where before they felt it was God's command not to report a crime. If somebody steals from you, turn your cheek. And that has slowly turned into a willingness to report crimes.
The murder of Barbara Weaver is planned and executed with the aid of technology in a community that forbids electronics.
A lot of Amish kids have cell phones. They sneak and hide and charge in the barn and keep in their pocket and that sort of thing. That's always part of the rebellion.
Because of his plea deal in exchange for testifying against Barbara, Eli Weaver gets 15 years to life in prison at the Marion Correctional Institution.
I know that Eli has made friends in prison. I think he's the leader of a work group or something. The way I characterize Eli is that he's like a super con man. He knows how to get what he wants by using his charm, and he uses people as a means of getting what he wants.
My opinion of him then became that he was clearly a very selfish man who would rather have his wife killed, and possibly his children as well, to get out of a marriage that he was not committed to, but yet to still have the Amish community, which he was not committed to, in the background willing to support him. So he really wanted the best of both worlds, and he wasn't worried about who he needed to kill to maintain that.
His wife, who all she wanted was a good marriage and children, and who tried so hard to reach him and never could, but that she was murdered because he wanted to be free.
In one of her last letters to her counselor, Barbara Weaver writes of her husband, quote, "I often think of Christ's words, 'Forgive him, for he knows not what he does.'"
The Amish community is an extremely forgiving community, but I think this has served to sever ties with Eli, although I have been told he still maintains a relationship with his children. I think some of them would be willing to see him or anxious to see him and reestablish a relationship.
Eli's children, who are the victims of the crime, may possibly show their father Amish forgiveness.
If you take into consideration the victims of the offense, they may be requesting the defendant get out. So that's another way to factor in how you decide whether or not justice has been served.
If his children speak on his behalf, it is possible Eli will be released in 2024, when he is 44 years of age.
But I don't believe he'll be able to come back to his Amish church and begin again as a member of the Amish community. Although, again, I'm amazed by their ability to forgive.
Barbara Raber is serving 20 years to life at the Ohio Reformatory for Women and will be eligible for parole in April of 2032.